Chapter 21, which treats of the exalted adventure and rich prize of Mambrino's helmet, together with other things that happened to our invincible knight. It now began to rain a little, and Sancho was for going into the fulling mills, but Don Quixote had taken such an abhorrence to them on account of the late joke that he would not enter them on any account. So turning aside to right, they came upon another road, different from that which they had taken the night before. Shortly afterwards Don Quixote perceived a man on horseback who wore on his head something that shone like gold, and the moment he saw him he turned to Sancho and said, "I think, Sancho, there is no proverb that is not true, all being maxims drawn from experience itself, the mother of all the sciences, especially that one that says, where one door shuts, another opens. I say so, because if last night fortune shut the door of the adventure we were looking for against us, cheating us with the fulling mills, it now opens wide another one for another better and more certain adventure, and if I do not contrive to enter it, it will be my own fault, and I cannot lay it to my ignorance of fulling mills or the darkness of the night. I say this because, if I mistake not, there comes towards us one who wears on his head the helmet of Mambrino, concerning which I took the oath you rememberest. Mind what you say, your worship, and still more what you do, said Sancho, for I don't want any more fulling mills to finish off fulling and knocking our senses out. The devil take you, man, said Don Quixote, what has a helmet to do with fulling mills? I don't know, replied Sancho, but, faith, if I may speak as I used, perhaps I could give such reasons that your worship would see you were mistaken in what you say. How can I be mistaken in what I say, unbelieving traitor? Returned Don Quixote. Tell me, seest you not over their knight coming towards us on a dappled grey steed, who has upon his head a helmet of gold? What I see and make out, answered Sancho, is only a man on a grey ass, like my own, who has something that shines on his head. Well, that is the helmet of Mambrino, said Don Quixote. Stand to one side and leave me alone with him. You shall see how, without saying a word, to save time, I shall bring this adventure to an issue and possess myself of the helmet I have so longed for. I will take care to stand aside, said Sancho, but God grant, I say, once more, that it may be marjoram and not fulling mills. I have told you, brother, on no account to mention those fulling mills to me again, said Don Quixote, or I vow, and I say no more, I'll full the soul out of you. Sancho held his peace in dread lest his master should carry out the vow he had hurled like a bowl at him. The fact of the matter as regards the helmet, steed, and knight that Don Quixote saw was this. In that neighborhood there were two villages, one of them so small that it had neither apothecary's shop nor barber, which the other that was close to it had. So the barber of the larger served the smaller, and in it there was a sick man who required to be bled and another man who wanted to be shaved, and on this errand the barber was going, carrying with him a brass basin. But as luck would have it, as he was on the way it began to rain, and not to spoil his hat, which probably was a new one, he put the basin on his head, and being clean it glittered at half a league's distance. He rode upon a grey ass, as Sancho said, and this was what made it seem to Don Quixote to be a dapple grey steed and a knight and a golden helmet, for everything he saw he made to fall in with his crazy chivalry and inerrant notions, and when he saw the poor knight draw near, without entering into any parley with him, at Rocinante's top speed he bore down upon him with the pike pointed low, fully determined to run him through and through. And as he reached him, without checking the fury of his charge, he cried to him, "Defend thyself, miserable being, or yield me of yours own accord that which is so reasonably my due." The barber, who without any expectation or apprehension of it saw this apparition coming down upon him, had no other way of saving himself from the stroke of the lance but to let himself fall off his ass, and no sooner had he touched the ground than he sprang up more nimbly than a deer and sped away across the plain faster than the wind. He left the basin on the ground, with which Don Quixote contented himself, saying that the pagan had shown his discretion and imitated the beaver, which finding itself pressed by the hunter's bites and cuts off with its test that for which, by its natural instinct, it knows it is pursued. He told Sancho to pick up the helmet, and he taking it in his hands said, "By God, the basin is a good one, and worth a reel of 8 if it is worth a Maravedis," and handed it to his master, who immediately put it on his head, turning it round, now this way, now that, in search of fitment, and, not finding it, he said, "Clearly the pagan to whose measure this famous head-piece was first forged must have had a very large head, but the worst of it is half of it is wanting." When Sancho heard him call the basin a headpiece he was unable to restrain his laughter, but remembering his master's wrath he checked himself in the amid of it. "What are you laughing at, Sancho?" said Don Quixote. "I am laughing," said he, "to think of the great head the pagan must have had who owned this helmet, for it looks exactly like a regular barber's basin." "Do you know what I suspect, Sancho?" said Don Quixote. "That this wonderful piece of this enchanted helmet must by some strange accident have come into the hands of someone who was unable to recognize or realize its value, and who, not knowing what he did, and seeing it to be of the purest gold, must have melted down one half for the sake of what it may be worth, and of the other made this, which is like a barber's basin as you sayest. But be it as it may, to me who recognize it, its transformation makes no difference, for I will set it to rights at the first village where there is a blacksmith, and in such style that that helmet the god of smithies forged for the god of battles shall not surpass it or evening come up to it. And in the meantime I will wear it as well as I can, for something is better than nothing, all the more as it will be quite enough to protect me from any chance blow of a stone. "That is," said Sancho, "if it is not shot with a sling as they were in the battle of the two armies, when they signed the cross on your worship's grinders and smashed the flask with that blessed draught that made me vomit my bowels up. It does not grieve me much to have lost it," said Don Quixote, "for you knowest, Sancho, that I have the receipt in my memory." "So have I," answered Sancho, "but if ever I make it, or try it again, as long as I live, may this be my last hour. Moreover, I have no intention of putting myself in the way of wanting it, for I mean, with all my 5 senses, to keep myself from being wounded or from wounding anyone. As to being blanketed again, I say nothing, for it is hard to prevent mishaps of that sort, and if they come there is nothing for it but to squeeze our shoulders together, hold our breath, shut our eyes, and let ourselves go where luck and the blanket may send us." "You are a bad Christian, Sancho," said Don Quixote on hearing this, "for once an injury has been done you never forgettest it. But know that it is the part of noble and generous hearts not to attach importance to trifles. What lame leg have you got by it? What broken rib? What cracked head, that you cannot forget that jest, for jest and sport it was properly regarded, and had I not seen it in that light I would have returned and done more mischief in revenging you than the Greeks did for the rape of Helen, who, if she were alive now, or if my Dulcinea had lived then, may depend upon it she would not be so famous for her beauty as she is." And here he heaved a sigh and sent it aloft, and said, "Sancho, let it pass for a jest, as it cannot be revenged in earnest, but I know what sort of jest and earnest it was, and I know it will never be rubbed out of my memory any more than off my shoulders. But putting that aside, will your worship tell me what are we to do with this dapple grey steed that looks like a grey ass, which that Martino that your worship overthrew has left deserted here, for, from the way he took to his heels and bolted, he is not likely ever to come back for it, and by my beard, but the gray is a good one. I have never been in the habit, said Don Quixote, of taking spoil of those whom I vanquish, nor is it the practice of chivalry to take away their horses and leave them to go on foot, unless truly it be that the victor have lost his own in the combat, in which case it is lawful to take that of the vanquished as a thing won in lawful war. Therefore, Sancho, leave this horse, or ass, or whatever you will have it to be, for when its owner sees us gone therefore he will come back for it. God knows I should like to take it, returned Sancho, or at least to change it for my own, which does not seem to me as good a one. Truly the laws of chivalry are strict, since they cannot be stretched to let one ass be changed for another. I should like to know if I may at least change trimmings. On that head I am not quite certain, answered Don Quixote, and the matter being doubtful, pending better information, I say you mayest change them, if so be you have urgent need of them. So urgent is it, answered Sancho, that if they were for my own person, I could not want them more. And immediately, fortified by this license, he effected the mutatio caparum, rigging out his beast to the 99s, and making quite another thing of it. This done, they broke their fast on the remains of the spoils of war plundered from the sumpter mule, and drank of the brook that flowed from the fulling mills, without casting a look in that direction. In such loathing did they hold them for the alarm they had caused them, and all anger and gloom removed, they mounted, and, without taking any fixed road not to fix upon any being the proper thing, for true knights errant, they set out, guided by Rocinante's will, which carried along with it that of his master, not to say that of the ass, which always followed him wherever he led, lovingly and sociably. Nevertheless they returned to the high road, and pursued it at a venture, without any other aim. As they went along, then, in this way Sancho said to his master, Senor, would your worship give me leave to speak a little to you? For since you laid that hard injunction of silence on me several things have gone to rot in my stomach, and I have now just one on the tip of my tongue that I don't want to be spoiled. Say on, Sancho, said Don Quixote, and be brief in your discourse, for there is no pleasure in one that is long. Well then, Senor, returned Sancho, I say that for some days past I have been considering how little is got or gained by going in search of these adventures that your worship seeks in these wilds and crossroads, where, evening if the most perilous are victoriously achieved, there is no one to see or know of them, and so they must be left untold forever, to the loss of your worship's object and the credit they deserve. Therefore, it seems to me it would be better, saving your worship's better judgment, if we were to go and serve some emperor or other great prince who may have some war on hand, in whose service your worship may prove the worth of your person, your great may, and greater understanding, on perceiving which the Lord in whose service we may be will perforce have to reward us, each according to his merits, and there you will not be at a loss for someone to set down your achievements in writing so as to preserve their memory forever. Of my own I say nothing, as they will not go beyond squirely limits, though I make bold to say that, if it be the practice in chivalry to write the achievements of squires, I think mine must not be left out. You speakest not amiss, Sancho, answered Don Quixote, but before that point is reached it is requisite to roam the world as it were on probation, seeking adventures, in order that, by achieving some name and fame may be acquired, such that when he betakes himself to the court of some great monarch the knight may be already known by his deeds, and that the boys, the instant they see him enter the gate of the city, may all follow him and surround him, crying, this is the Knight of the Sun or the Serpent, or any other title under which he may have achieved great deeds. This, they will say, is he who vanquished in single combat the gigantic Bruno of mighty strength, he who delivered the great Mamluk of Persia out of the long enchantment under which he had been for almost 900 years. So from one to another they will go, proclaiming his achievements, and soon at the tumult of the boys and the others the king of that kingdom will appear at the windows of his royal palace, and as soon as he beholds the knight, recognizing him by his arms and the device on his shield, he will as a matter of course say, "What ho, forth all ye, the knights of my court, to receive the flower of chivalry who comes here," at which command all will issue forth, and he himself, advancing halfway down the stairs, will embrace him closely and salute him, kissing him on the cheek, and will then lead him to the queen's chamber, where the knight will find her with the princess her daughter, who will be one of the most beautiful and accomplished damsels that could with the utmost pains be discovered anywhere in the known world. Immediately it will come to pass that she will fix her eyes upon the knight and he his upon her, and each will seem to the other something more divine than human, and, without knowing how or why, they will be taken and entangled in the inextricable toils of love, and sorely distressed in their hearts not to see any way of making their pains and sufferings known by speech. From there they will lead him, no doubt, to some richly adorned chamber of the palace, where, having removed his armor, they will bring him a rich mantle of scarlet with which to robe himself, and if he looked noble in his armor he will look still more so in a doublet. When night comes he will sup with the king, queen, and princess, and all the time he will never take his eyes off her, stealing stealthy glances unnoticed by those present, and she will do the same, and with equal cautiousness, being, as I have said, a damsel of great discretion. The tables being removed, suddenly through the door of the hall there will enter a hideous and diminutive dwarf, followed by a fair dame between two giants, who comes with a certain adventure, the work of an ancient sage, and he who shall achieve it shall be deemed the best knight in the world. The king will then command all those present to essay it, and none will bring it to an end and conclusion save the stranger knight, to the great enhancement of his fame, whereat the princess will be overjoyed and will esteem herself happy and fortunate in having fixed and placed her thoughts so high. And the best of it is that this king, or prince, or whatever he is engaged in a very bitter war with another as powerful as himself, and the stranger knight, after having been some days at his court, requests leave from him to go and serve him in the said war. The king will grant it very readily, and the knight will courteously kiss his hands for the favor done to him, and that night he will take leave of his lady the princess at the grating of the chamber where she sleeps, which looks upon a garden, and at which he has already many times conversed with her, the go-between and confidante in the matter being a damsel much trusted by the princess. He will sigh, she will swoon, the damsel will fetch water, much distressed because morning approaches, and for the honor of her lady he would not that they were discovered. At last the princess will come to herself and will present her white hands through the grating to the knight, who will kiss them 1,000 times, bathing them with his tears. It will be arranged between them how they are to inform each other of their good or evil fortunes, and the princess will entreat him to make his absence as short as possible, which he will promise to do with many oaths. Once more he kisses her hands, and takes his leave in such grief that he is well near ready to die. He betakes him from there to his chamber, flings himself on his bed, cannot sleep for sorrow at parting, rises early in the morning, goes to take leave of the king, queen, and princess, and as he takes his leave of the pair, it is told him that the princess is indisposed and cannot receive a visit. The knight thinks it is from grief at his departure. His heart is pierced, and he is hardly able to keep from showing his pain. The confidante is present, observes all, goes to tell her mistress, who listens with tears and says that one of her greatest distresses is not knowing who this knight is, and whether he is of kingly lineage or not. The damsel assures her that so much courtesy, gentleness, and gallantry of bearing as her knight possesses could not exist in any, save one who was royal and illustrious. Her anxiety is thus relieved, and she strives to be of good cheer lest she should excite suspicion in her parents, and at the end of 2 days she appears in public. Meanwhile the knight has taken his departure. He fights in the war, conquers the king's enemy, wins many cities, triumphs in many battles, returns to the court, sees his lady where he was wont to see her, and it is agreed that he shall demand her in marriage of her parents as the reward of his services. The king is unwilling to give her, as he knows not who he is, but nevertheless, whether carried off or in whatever other way it may be, the princess comes to be his bride, and her father comes to regard it as very good fortune, for it so happens that this knight is proved to be the son of a valiant king of some kingdom, I know not what, for I fancy it is not likely to be on the map. The father dies, the princess inherits, and, in 2 words, the knight becomes king. And here comes in at once the bestowal of rewards upon his squire and all who have aided him in rising to so exalted a rank. He marries his squire to a damsel of the princesses, who will be, no doubt, the one who was confidante in their amour, and is daughter of a very great duke. That's what I want, and no mistake about it, said Sancho. That's what I'm waiting for all this, word for word, is in store for your worship under the title of the Knight of the Rueful Countenance. You needst not doubt it, Sancho, replied Don Quixote, for in the same manner, and by the same steps as I have described here, knights errant rise and have risen to be kings and emperors. All we want now is to find out what king, Christian or pagan, is at war and has a beautiful daughter. But there will be time enough to think of that, for, as I have told you, fame must be won in other quarters before repairing to the court. There is another thing, too, that is wanting, for supposing we find a king who is at war and has a beautiful daughter, and that I have won incredible fame throughout the universe, I know not how it can be made out that I am of royal lineage, or even second cousin to an emperor, for the king will not be willing to give me his daughter in marriage unless he is first thoroughly satisfied on this point, however much my famous deeds may deserve it, so that by this deficiency I fear I shall lose what my arm has fairly earned. True it is I am a gentleman of known house, of estate and property, and entitled to the 500 sueldos, mulct, and it may be that the sage who shall write my history will so clear up my ancestry and pedigree that I may find myself 5th or 6th in descent from a king, for I would have you know, Sancho, that there are 2 kinds of lineages in the world. Some there be tracing and deriving their descent from kings and princes, whom time has reduced, little by little, until they end in a point like a pyramid upside down, and others who spring from the common herd and go on rising step by step, until they come to be great lords, so that the difference is that the one were what they no longer are, and the others are what they formerly were not. And I may be of such that after investigation my origin may prove great and famous, with which the king, my father-in-law that is to be, ought to be satisfied, and should he not be, the princess will so love me, that evening though she well knew me to be the son of a water-carrier, she will take me for her lord and husband in spite of her father. If not, then it comes to seizing her and carrying her off where I please, for time or death will put an end to the wrath of her parents. It comes to this, too, said Sancho, what some naughty people say, never ask as a favor what you can take by force, though it would fit better to say, a clear escape is better than good men's prayers. I say so because if my lord the king, your worship's father-in-law, will not condescend to give you my lady the princess, there is nothing for it but, as your worship says, to seize her and transport her But the mischief is that until peace is made and you come into the peaceful enjoyment of your kingdom, the poor squire is famishing as far as rewards go, unless it be that the confidante damsel that is to be his wife comes with the princess, and that with her he tides over his bad luck until heaven otherwise orders things for his master, I suppose, may as well give her to him at once for a lawful wife. Nobody can object to that, said Don Quixote. Then since that may be, said Sancho, there is nothing for it but to commend ourselves to God, and let fortune take what course it will. God guide it according to my wishes and your wants, said Don Quixote, and mean be he who thinks himself mean. In God's name let him be so, said Sancho. I am an old Christian, and to fit me for account that's enough. And more than enough for you, said Don Quixote. An evening were you not, it would make no difference, because I being the king can easily give you nobility without purchase or service rendered by you, for when I make you a count, then you are at once a gentleman, and they may say what they will, but by my faith they will have to call you your lordship, whether they like it or not. Not a doubt of it, and I'll know how to support the tittle, said Sancho. Title you shouldst say, not tittle, said his master. So be it, answered Sancho. I say I will know how to behave, for once in my life I was beadle of a brotherhood, and the beadle's gown sat so well on me that all said I looked as if I was to be steward of the same brotherhood. What will it be, then, when I put a duke's robe on my back, or dress myself in gold and pearls like a count? I believe they'll come 100 leagues to see me. You will look well, said Don Quixote, but you must shave your beard often, for you have it so thick and rough and unkempt, that if you do not shave it every second day at least, they will see what you are at the distance of a musket shot. What more will it be, said Sancho, than having a barber and keeping him at wages in the house, and evening, if it be necessary, I will make him go behind me like a nobleman's equerry. Why, how do you know that noblemen have equerries behind them? Asked Don Quixote. I will tell you, answered Sancho. Years ago I was for a month at the capital, and there I saw taking the air a very small gentleman who they said was a very great man, and a man following him on horseback in every turn he took, just as if he was his tail. Chapter 22. Of the freedom Don Quixote conferred on several unfortunates who against their will were being carried where they had no wish to go. Side Hamid Benengeli, the Arab and Manchegan author, relates in this most grave, high-sounding, minute, delightful, and original history that, after the discussion between the famous Don Quixote of La Mancha and his squire Sancho Panza, which is set down at the end of chapter 21, Don Quixote raised his eyes and saw coming along the road he was following some dozen men on foot strung together by the neck, like beads, on a great iron chain, and all with manacles on their hands. With them there came also 2 men on horseback and 2 on foot, those on horseback with wheellock muskets, those on foot with javelins and swords, and as soon as Sancho saw them he said, that is a chain of galley slaves on the way to the galleys by force of the king's orders. How by force? Asked Don Quixote. Is it possible that the king uses force against anyone? I do not say that, answered Sancho, but that these are people condemned for their crimes to serve by force in the king's galleys. In fact, replied Don Quixote, however it may be, these people are going where they are taking them by force, and not of their own will. Just so, said Sancho. Then if so, said Don Quixote, here is a case for the exercise of my office, to put down force and to succor and help the wretched. Recollect, your worship, said Sancho, justice, which is the king himself, is not using force or doing wrong to such persons, but punishing them for their crimes. The chain of galley slaves had by this time come up, and Don Quixote in very courteous language asked those who were in custody of it to be good enough to tell him the reason or reasons for which they were conducting these people in this manner. One of the guards on horseback answered that they were galley slaves belonging to his majesty, that they were going to the galleys, and that was all that was to be said and all he had any business to know. Nevertheless, replied Don Quixote, I should like to know from each of them separately the reason of his misfortune. To this he added more to the same effect to induce them to tell him what he wanted so civilly that the other mounted guard said to him, though we have here the register and certificate of the sentence of every one of these wretches, this is no time to take them out or read them. Come and ask themselves, they can tell if they choose, and they will, for these fellows take a pleasure in doing and talking about rascalities. With this permission, which Don Quixote would have taken evening had they not granted it, he approached the chain and asked the first for what offenses he was now in such a sorry case. He made answer that it was for being a lover. For that only? Replied Don Quixote. Why, if for being lovers they send people to the galleys, I may have been rowing in them long ago. The love is not the sort your worship is thinking of, said the galley slave. Mine was that I loved a washerwoman's basket of clean linen so well, and held it so close in my embrace, that if the arm of the law had not forced it from me, I should never have let it go of my own will. To this moment, I was caught in the act. There was no occasion for torture. The case was settled. They treated me to 100 lashes on the back, and 3 years of girapas besides, and that was the end of it. What are girapas? Asked Don Quixote. Girapas are galleys, answered the galley slave, who was a young man of about 24, and said he was a native of Piedrahita. Don Quixote asked the same question of the second, who made no reply, so downcast and melancholy was he. But the first answered for him, and said he, Sir, goes as a canary, I mean as a musician and a singer. What? Said Don Quixote, for being musicians and singers are people sent to the galleys too? Yes, sir, answered the galley slave, for there is nothing worse than singing under suffering. On the contrary, I have heard say, said Don Quixote, that he who sings scares away his woes. Here it is the reverse, said the galley slave, for he who sings once weeps all his life. I do not understand it, said Don Quixote. But one of the guards said to him, Sir, to sing under suffering means with the non-sancta fraternity to confess under torture. They put this sinner to the torture and he confessed his crime, which was being a cuatrero, that is a cattle stealer, and on his confession they sentenced him to 6 years in the galleys, besides 200 lashes that he has already had on the back, and he is always dejected and downcast because the other thieves that were left behind and that march here ill-treat, and snub, and jeer, and despise him for confessing and not having spirit enough to say no. For, say they, no has no more letters in it than yes, and a culprit is well off when life or death with him depends on his own tongue and not on that of witnesses or evidence, and to my thinking they are not very far out. And I think so too, answered Don Quixote. Then passing on to the third, he asked him what he had asked the others, and the man answered very readily and unconcernedly, I am going for 5 years to their ladyships, the girapas, for the want of 10 ducats. I will give 20 with pleasure to get you out of that trouble, said Don Quixote. That, said the galley slave, is like a man having money at sea when he is dying of hunger and has no way of buying what he wants. I say so, because if at the right time I had had those 20 ducats that your worship now offers me, I would have greased the notary's pen and freshened up the attorney's wit with them, so that today I should be in the middle of the plaza of the Zacadover at Toledo, and not on this road, coupled like a greyhound. But God is great. Patience, there, that's enough of it. Don Quixote passed on to the fourth, a man of venerable aspect with a white beard falling below his breast, who on hearing himself asked the reason of his being there began to weep without answering a word. But the fifth acted as his tongue and said, This worthy man is going to the galleys for 4 years, after having done the rounds in ceremony and on horseback. "That means," said Sancho Panza, "as I take it, to have been exposed to shame in public." "Just so," replied the galley slave, "and the offense for which they gave him that punishment was having been an ear broker, no body broker. I mean, in short, that this gentleman goes as a pimp, and for having, besides a certain touch of the sorcerer about him." "If that touch had not been thrown in," said Don Quixote, "he would not deserve, for mere pimping, to row in the galleys, but rather to command, and be admiral of them. For the office of pimp is no ordinary one, being the office of persons of discretion, one very necessary in a well-ordered state, and only to be exercised by persons of good birth. No, there ought to be an inspector and overseer of them, as in other offices, and recognized number, as with the brokers on change. In this way many of the evils would be avoided which are caused by this office and calling being in the hands of stupid and ignorant people, such as women more or less silly, and pages and jesters of little standing and experience, who on the most urgent occasions, and when ingenuity of contrivance is needed, let the crumbs freeze on the way to their mouths, and know not which is their right hand. I should like to go farther and give reasons to show that it is advisable to choose those who are to hold so necessary an office in the state, but this is not the fit place for it. Some day I will expound the matter to someone able to see to and rectify it. All I say now is that the additional fact of his being a sorcerer has removed the sorrow it gave me to see these white hairs and this venerable countenance in so painful a position on account of his being a pimp. Though I know well there are no sorceries in the world that can move or compel the will as some simple folk fancy, for our will is free, nor is there herb or charm that can force it. All that certain silly women and quacks do is to turn men mad with potions and poisons, pretending that they have power to cause love, for, as I say, it is an impossibility to compel the will. "It is true," said the good old man, "and truly, sir, as far as the charge of sorcery goes I was not guilty. As to that of being a pimp I cannot deny it, but I never thought I was doing any harm by it, for my only object was that all the world should enjoy itself and live in peace and quiet, without quarrels or troubles, but my good intentions were unavailing to save me from going where I never expect to come back from, with this weight of years upon me, and a urinary ailment that never gives me a moment's ease." And again he fell to weeping as before, and such compassion did Sancho feel for him that he took out a real of 4 from his bosom and gave it to him in alms. Don Quixote went on and asked another what his crime was, and the man answered with no less but rather much more sprightliness than the last one: "I am here because I carried the joke too far with a couple of cousins of mine, and with a couple of other cousins who were none of mine. In short, I carried the joke so far with them all that it ended in such a complicated increase of kindred that no accountant could make it clear. It was all proved against me. I got no favor, I had no money, I was near having my neck stretched. They sentenced me to the gallows for 6 years. I accepted my fate. It is the punishment of my fault. I'm a young man. Let life only last, and with that all will come right. If you, sir, have anything with which to help the poor, God will repay it to you in heaven, and we on earth will take care in our petitions to him to pray for the life and health of your worship, that they may be as long and as good as your amiable appearance deserves." This one was in the dress of a student, and one of the guards said he was a great talker, and a very elegant Latin scholar. Behind all these there came a man of 30, a very personable fellow, except that when he looked his eyes turned in a little one towards the other. He was bound differently from the rest, for he had to his leg a chain so long that it was wound all round his body, and 2 rings on his neck, one attached to the chain, the other to what they call a keep friend or friend's foot, from which hung 2 irons reaching to his waist, with 2 manacles fixed to them, in which his hands were secured by a big padlock, so that he could neither raise his hands to his mouth nor lower his head to his hands. Don Quixote asked why this man carried so many more chains than the others. The guard replied that it was because he alone had committed more crimes than all the rest put together, and was so daring and such a villain, that though they marched him in that fashion they did not feel sure of him, but were in dread of his making his escape. "What crimes can he have committed," said Don Quixote, "if they have not deserved a heavier punishment than being sent to the galleys?" "He goes for 10 years," replied the guard, "which is the same thing as civil death, and all that need be said is that this good fellow is the famous Gins de Passamont, otherwise called Ginesillo de Parapilla." "Gently, Senor Commissary," said the galley slave at this, "let us have no fixing of names or surnames. My name is Gins, not Ginesillo, and my family name is Passamont, not Parapilla as you say. Let each one mind his own business, and he will be doing enough." "Speak with less impertinence, master thief of extra measure," replied the commissary, "if you don't want me to make you hold your tongue in spite of your Tess." "It is easy to see," returned the galley slave, "that man goes as God pleases, but someone shall know some day whether I am called Ginesillo de Parapilla or not." "Don't they call you so, you liar?" said the guard. "They do," returned Gins, "but I will make them give over calling me so, or I will be shaved. Where, I only say behind my Tess. If you, sir, have anything to give us, give it to us at once, and God speed you, for you are becoming tiresome with all this inquisitiveness about the lives of others. If you want to know about mine, let me tell you I am Gins de Passamont, whose life is written by these fingers." "He says true," said the commissary, "for he has himself written his story as grand as you please, and has left the book in the prison in pawn for 200 reals. "And I mean to take it out of pawn," said Gins, "though it were in for 200 ducats." "Is it so good?" said Don Quixote. "So good is it," replied Gins, "that a fig for Lazarillo de Tormes, and all of that kind that have been written, or shall be written compared with it. All I will say about it is that it deals with facts, and facts so neat and diverting that no lies could match them." "And how is the book entitled?" asked Don Quixote. "The Life of Gins de Passamont," replied the subject of it. "And is it finished?" asked Don Quixote. "How can it be finished," said the other, "when my life is not yet finished? All that is written is from my birth down to the point when they sent me to the galleys this last time." "Then you have been there before," said Don Quixote. "In the service of God and the king I have been there for 4 years before now, and I know by this time what the biscuit and curbesh are like," replied Gins, "and it is no great grievance to me to go back to them, for there I shall have time to finish my book. I have still many things left to say, and in the galleys of Spain there is more than enough leisure, though I do not want much for what I have to write, for I have it by heart." "You seem a clever fellow," said Don Quixote. "And an unfortunate one," replied Gins, "for misfortune always persecutes good wit." "It persecutes rogues," said the commissary. "I told you already to go gently, master commissary," said Passamont. "Their lordships over there never gave you that staff to ill-treat us wretches here, but to conduct and take us where his majesty orders you. If not, by the life of never mind, it may be that some day the stains made in the inn will come out in the scouring. Let everyone hold his tongue and behave well and speak better. And now let us march on, for we have had quite enough of this entertainment." The commissary lifted his staff to strike Passamont in return for his threats, but Don Quixote came between them, and begged him not to ill-use him, as it was not too much to allow one who had his hands tied to have his tongue a trifle free, and turning to the whole chain of them he said, "From all you have told me, dear brethren, make out clearly that though they have punished you for your faults, the punishments you are about to endure do not give you much pleasure, and that you go to them very much against the grain and against your will, and that perhaps this one's want of courage under torture that one's want of money, the other's want of advocacy, and lastly the perverted judgment of the judge may have been the cause of your ruin and of your failure to obtain the justice you had on your side. All which presents itself now to my mind, urging, persuading, and evening compelling me to demonstrate in your case the purpose for which heaven sent me into the world and caused me to make profession of the order of chivalry to which I belong, and the vow I took, in that to give aid to those in need and under the oppression of the strong. But as I know that it is a mark of prudence not to do by foul means what may be done by fair, I will ask these gentlemen, the guards and commissary, to be so good as to release you and let you go in peace, as there will be no lack of others to serve the king under more favorable circumstances, for it seems to me a hard case to make slaves of those whom God and nature have made free. Moreover, sirs of the guard, added Don Quixote, these poor fellows have done nothing to you. Let each answer for his own sins over there. There is a God in heaven who will not forget to punish the wicked or reward the good, and it is not fitting that honest men should be the instruments of punishment to others, they being in that no way concerned. This request I make thus, gently and quietly, that, if you comply with it, I may have reason for thanking you, and if you will not voluntarily, this lance and sword, together with the may of my arm, shall compel you to comply with it by force. Nice nonsense, said the commissary, a fine piece of pleasantry he has come out with at last. He wants us to let the king's prisoners go, as if we had any authority to release them, or he to order us to do so. Go your way, sir, and good luck to you. Put that basin straight that you've got on your head, and don't go looking for 3 feet on a cat. It is you that are the cat, rat, and rascal, replied Don Quixote, and, acting on the word, he fell upon him so suddenly that without giving him time to defend himself, he brought him to the ground sorely wounded with a lance thrust, and lucky it was for him that it was the one that had the musket. The other guards stood thunderstruck and amazed at this unexpected event, but recovering presence of mind, those on horseback seized their swords and those on foot their javelins and attacked Don Quixote, who was waiting for them with great calmness, and no doubt it would have gone badly with him if the galley slaves, seeing the chance before them of liberating themselves, had not effected it by contriving to break the chain on which they were strung. Such was the confusion, that the guards, now rushing at the galley slaves who were breaking loose, now to attack Don Quixote who was waiting for them, did nothing at all that was of any use. Sancho, on his part, gave a helping hand to release Gins de Passamont, who was the first to leap forth upon the plain free and unfettered, and who, attacking the prostrate commissary, took from him his sword and the musket, with which, aiming at one and leveling at another, he, without ever discharging it, drove every one of the guards off the field, for they took to flight, as well to escape Passamont's musket as the showers of stones the now released galley slaves were raining upon them. Sancho was greatly grieved at the affair, because he anticipated that those who had fled would report the matter to the Holy Brotherhood, who at the summons of the alarm bell would at once sally forth in quest of the offenders, and he said so to his master, and entreated him to leave the place at once, and go into hiding in the sierra that was close by. That is all very well, said Don Quixote, but I know what must be done now, and calling together all the galley slaves, who were now running riot, and had stripped the commissary to the skin, he collected them round him to hear what he had to say, and addressed them as follows: to be grateful for benefits received is the part of persons of good birth, and one of the sins most offensive to God is ingratitude. I say so, because, sirs, ye have already seen by manifest proof the benefit ye have received of me, in return for which I desire, and it is my good pleasure, that, laden with that chain which I have taken off your necks, ye at once set out and proceed to the city of El Toboso, and there present yourselves before the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso, and say to her that her Knight, he of the rueful countenance, sends to commend himself to her, and that ye recount to her in full detail all the particulars of this notable adventure, up to the recovery of your longed for liberty, and this done ye may go where ye will, and good fortune attend you. Gins de Passamont made answer for all, saying, that which you, sir, our deliverer, demand of us, is of all impossibilities the most impossible to comply with, because we cannot go together along the roads, but only singly and separate, and each one his own way, endeavoring to hide ourselves in the bowels of the earth to escape the holy brotherhood, which, no doubt, will come out in search of us. What your worship may do, and fairly do, is to change this service and tribute as regards the lady Dulcinea del Toboso for a certain quantity of Ave Marias and Credos which we will say for your worship's intention, and this is a condition that can be complied with by night as by day, running or resting, in peace or in war. But to imagine that we are going now to return to the flesh spots of Egypt, I mean to take up our chain and set out for El Toboso, is to imagine that it is now night, though it is not yet 10 in the morning, and to ask this of us is like asking pears of the elm tree. Then by all that's good, said Don Quixote, now stirred to wrath, Don, son of a bitch, Don Ginesillo de Parapillo, or whatever your name is, you will have to go yourself alone, with your tail between your legs and the whole chain on your back. Passamont, who was anything but meek, being by this time thoroughly convinced that Don Quixote was not quite right in his head, as he had committed such a vagary as to set them free, finding himself abused in this fashion, gave the wink to his companions, and falling back they began to shower stones on Don Quixote at such a rate that he was quite unable to protect himself with his buckler, and poor Rocinante no more heeded the spur than if he had been made of brass. Sancho planted himself behind his ass, and with him sheltered himself from the hailstorm that poured on both of them. Don Quixote was unable to shield himself so well, but that more pebbles than I could count struck him full on the body with such force that they brought him to the ground, and the instant he fell, the student pounced upon him, snatched the basin from his head, and with it struck 3 or 4 blows on his shoulders, and as many more on the ground, knocking it almost to pieces. They then stripped him of a jacket that he wore over his armor, and they would have stripped off his stockings if his greaves had not prevented them. From Sancho they took his coat, leaving him in his shirt sleeves, and dividing among themselves the remaining spoils of the battle, they went each one his own way, more solicitous about keeping clear of the holy brotherhood they dreaded than about burdening themselves with a chain, or going to present themselves before the lady Dulcinea del Toboso. Chapter 23 of what befell Don Quixote in the Sierra Morena, which was one of the rarest adventures related in this veracious history. Seeing himself served in this way, Don Quixote said to his squire, I have always heard it said, Sancho, that to do good to boors is to throw water into the sea. If I had believed your words, I should have avoided this trouble. But it is done now. It is only to have patience and take warning for the future. Your worship will take warning as much as I am a Turk, returned Sancho. But, as you say, this mischief may have been avoided if you had believe me now, and a still greater one will be avoided, for I tell you chivalry is of no account with the holy brotherhood, and they don't care 2 maravedis for all the knights errant in the world, and I can tell you I fancy I hear their arrows whistling past my ears this minute. You are a coward by nature, Sancho, said Don Quixote, but lest you shouldst say I am obstinate, and that I never do as you do advise, this once I will take your advice, and withdraw out of reach of that fury you so dreadest, but it must be on one condition, that never, in life or in death, you are to say to anyone that I retired or withdrew from this danger out of fear, but only in compliance with your entreaties. For if you sayest otherwise, you will lie in that, and from this time to that, and from that to this. I give you lie, and say you least, and will lie every time you thinkest or sayest it. and answer me not again, for at the mere thought that I am withdrawing or retiring from any danger above all from this, which does seem to carry some little shadow of fear with it, I am ready to take my stand here and await alone, not only that holy brotherhood you talk of and dread, but the brothers of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the 7 Maccabees, and Castor and Pollux, and all the brothers and brotherhoods in the world. Senor, replied Sancho, to retire is not to flee, and there is no wisdom in waiting when danger outweighs hope, and it is the part of wise men to preserve themselves today for tomorrow, and not risk all in one day. And let me tell you, though I am a clown and a bore, I have got some notion of what they call safe conduct, so repent not of having taken my advice, but mount Rocinante if you can, and if not I will help you, and follow me, for my mother wit tells me we have more need of legs than hands just now. Don Quixote mounted without replying, and Sancho leading the way on his ass, they entered the side of the Sierra Morna, which was close by, as it was Sancho's design to cross it entirely and come out again at El Viso, or Almodovar del Campo, and hide for some days among its crags so as to escape the search of the brotherhood should they come to look for them. He was encouraged in this by perceiving that the stock of provisions carried by the ass had come safe out of the fray with the galley slaves, a circumstance that he regarded as a miracle, seeing how they pillaged and ransacked. That night they reached the very heart of the Sierra Morna, where it seemed prudent to Sancho to pass the night and evening, some days, at least, as many as the stores he carried may last, and so they encamped between 2 rocks and among some cork trees. But fatal destiny, which, according to the opinion of those who have not the light of the true faith, directs, arranges, and settles everything in its own way, so ordered it, that Gins de Passamont, the famous knave and thief who by the virtue and madness of Don Quixote had been released from the chain, driven by fear of the holy brotherhood, which he had good reason to dread, resolved to take hiding in the mountains, and his fate and fear led him to the same spot to which Don Quixote and Sancho Panza had been led by theirs, just in time to recognize them and leave them to fall asleep. And as the wicked are always ungrateful, and necessity leads to evil doing, and immediate advantage overcomes all considerations of the future, Gins, who was neither grateful nor well-principled, made up his mind to steal Sancho Panza's ass, not troubling himself about Rocinante, as being a prize that was no good either to pledge or sell. While Sancho slept he stole his ass, and before day dawned he was far out of reach. Aurora made her appearance, bringing gladness to the earth, but sadness to Sancho Panza, for he found that his Dapple was missing, and seeing himself bereft of him, he began the saddest and most doleful lament in the world, so loud that Don Quixote awoke at his exclamations and heard him saying, O son of my bowels, born in my very house, my children's plaything, my wife's joy, the envy of my neighbors, relief of my burdens, and lastly, half supporter of myself, for with the 26 maravedis you didst earn me daily I met half my charges. Don Quixote, when he heard the lament and learned the cause, consoled Sancho with the best arguments he could, entreating him to be patient, and promising to give him a letter of exchange ordering 3 out of 5 ass colts that he had at home to be given to him. Sancho took comfort at this, dried his tears, suppressed his sobs, and returned thanks for the kindness shown him by Don Quixote. He on his part was rejoiced to the heart on entering the mountains, as they seemed to him to be just the place for the adventures he was in quest of. They brought back to his memory the marvelous adventures that had befallen knights errant in like solitudes and wilds, and he went along reflecting on these things, so absorbed and carried away by them that he had no thought for anything else. Nor had Sancho any other care now that he fancied he was traveling in a safe quarter than to satisfy his appetite with such remains as were left of the clerical spoils, and so he marched behind his master laden with what Dapple used to carry, emptying the sack and packing his paunch, and so long as he could go that way he would not have given a farthing to meet with another adventure. While so engaged he raised his eyes and saw that his master had halted, and was trying with the point of his pike to lift some bulky object that lay upon the ground, on which he hastened to join him and help him if it were needful, and reached him just as with the point of the pike he was raising the saddle pad with a valise attached to it, half or rather wholly rotten and torn. But so heavy were they that Sancho had to help to take them up, and his master directed him to see what the valise contained. Sancho did so with great alacrity, and though the valise was secured by a chain and padlock, from its torn and rotten condition he was able to see its contents, which were 4 shirts of fine holland, and other articles of linen no less curious than clean, and in a handkerchief he found a good lot of gold crowns, and as soon as he saw them he exclaimed, "Blessed be all heaven for sending us an adventure that is good for something." Searching further he found a little memorandum book richly bound. This Don Quixote asked of him, telling him to take the money and keep it for himself. Sancho kissed his hands for the favor and cleared the valise of its linen, which he stowed away in the provision sack. Considering the whole matter, Don Quixote observed, "It seems to me, Sancho, and it is impossible it can be otherwise, that some strayed traveler must have crossed the Sierra and been attacked and slain by footpads, who brought him to this remote spot to bury him." "That cannot be," answered Sancho, "because if they had been robbers they would not have left this money." "You are right," said Don Quixote, "and I cannot guess or explain what this may mean. But stay, let us see if in this memorandum book there is anything written by which we may be able to trace out or discover what we want to know." He opened it, and the first thing he found in it, written roughly but in a very good hand, was a sonnet, and reading it aloud that Sancho may hear it, he found that it ran as follows: "Sonnet. Poor love is lacking in intelligence, or to the height of cruelty attains, or else it is my doom to suffer pains beyond the measure due to my offense. But if love be a god, it follows from there that he knows all, and certain it remains, no god loves cruelty. Then who ordains this penance that enthralls while it torments? It were a falsehood, Chloe, you to name such evil with such goodness cannot live, and against heaven I dare not charge the blame. I only know it is my fate to die. To him who knows not from where his malady, a miracle alone a cure can give." "There is nothing to be learned from that rhyme," said Sancho, "unless by that clue there's in it one may draw out the ball of the whole matter." "What clue is there?" said Don Quixote. "I thought your worship spoke of a clue in it," said Sancho. "I only said Chloe," replied Don Quixote, "and that no doubt is the name of the lady of whom the author of the sonnet complains, and faith, he must be a tolerable poet, or I know little of the craft." "Then your worship understands rhyming too?" "And better than you thinkest," replied Don Quixote, "as you shall see, when you carriest a letter written in verse from beginning to end to my Lady Dulcinea del Toboso, for I would have you know, Sancho, that all or most of the knights errant in days of yore were great troubadours and great musicians, for both of these accomplishments, or more properly speaking gifts, are the peculiar property of lovers errant. True it is that the verses of the knights of old have more spirit than neatness in them." "Read more, your worship," said Sancho, "and you will find something that will enlighten us." Don Quixote turned the page and said, "This is prose and seems to be a letter, a correspondence letter, senor." "From the beginning it seems to be a love letter," replied Don Quixote. "Then let your worship read it aloud," said Sancho, "for I am very fond of love matters." "With all my heart," said Don Quixote, and reading it aloud as Sancho had requested him, he found it ran thus: "Your false promise and my sure misfortune carry me to a place from where the news of my death will reach your ears before the words of my complaint. Ungrateful one, you have rejected me for one more wealthy, but not more worthy. but if virtue were esteemed wealth, I should neither envy the fortunes of others nor weep for misfortunes of my own. What your beauty raised up your deeds have laid low. By it I believed you to be an angel, by them I know you are a woman. Peace be with you who have sent word to me, and heaven grant that the deceit of your husband be ever hidden from you, so that you repent not of what you have done, and I reap not a revenge I would not have. When he had finished the letter, Don Quixote said, "There is less to be gathered from this than from the verses, except that he who wrote it is some rejected lover," and turning over nearly all the pages of the book, he found more verses and letters, some of which he could read, while others he could not. But they were all made up of complaints, laments, misgivings, desires and aversions, favors and rejections, some rapturous, some doleful. While Don Quixote examined the book, Sancho examined the valise, not leaving a corner in the whole of it or in the pad that he did not search, peer into, and explore, or seem that he did not rip, or tuft of wool that he did not pick to pieces, lest anything should escape for want of care and pains. So keen was the covetousness excited in him by the discovery of the crowns, which amounted to near 100, and though he found no more booty, he held the blanket flights, balsam vomits, stake benedictions, carriers' fisticuffs missing, alforjas, stolen coat, and all the hunger, thirst, and weariness he had endured in the service of his good master, cheap at the price, as he considered himself more than fully indemnified for all by the payment he received in the gift of the treasure trove. The Knight of the Rueful Countenance was still very anxious to find out who the owner of the valise could be, conjecturing from the sonnet and letter, from the money in gold, and from the fineness of the shirts, that he must be some lover of distinction whom the scorn and cruelty of his lady had driven to some desperate course. But as in that uninhabited and rugged spot there was no one to be seen of whom he could inquire, he saw nothing else for it but to push on, taking whatever road Rocinante chose, which was where he could make his way, firmly persuaded that among these wilds he could not fail to meet some rare adventure. As he went along, then, occupied with these thoughts, he perceived on the summit of a height that rose before their eyes a man who went springing from rock to rock and from tussock to tussock with marvelous agility. As well as he could make out he was unclad, with a thick black beard, long tangled hair, and bare legs and feet. His thighs were covered by breeches, apparently of tawny velvet, but so ragged that they showed his skin in several places. He was bareheaded, and notwithstanding the swiftness with which he passed, as has been described, the Knight of the Rueful Countenance observed and noted all these trifles, and though he made the attempt he was unable to follow him, for it was not granted to the feebleness of Rocinante to make way over such rough ground, he being, moreover, slow-paced and sluggish by nature. Don Quixote at once came to the conclusion that this was the owner of the saddle-pad and of the valise, and made up his mind to go in search of him, even though he should have to wander a year in those mountains before he found him. And so he directed Sancho to take a short cut over one side of the mountain, while he himself went by the other, and perhaps by this means they may light upon this man who had passed so quickly out of their sight. "I could not do that," said Sancho, "for when I separate from your worship fear at once lays hold of me, and assails me with all sorts of panics and fancies. And let what I now say be a notice that from this time forth I am not going to stir a finger's width from your presence." "It shall be so," said he of the Rueful Countenance, "and I am very glad that you are willing to rely on my courage, which will never fail you, even though the soul and your body fail you. So come on now behind me, slowly as well as you can, and make lanterns of yours eyes. Let us make the circuit of this ridge. Perhaps we shall light upon this man that we saw, who no doubt is no other than the owner of what we found." To which Sancho made answer, "Far better would it be not to look for him, for if we find him, and he happens to be the owner of the money, it is plain I must restore it. It would be better, therefore, that without taking this needless trouble, I should keep possession of it until in some other less meddlesome and officious way the real owner may be discovered, and perhaps that will be when I shall have spent it, and then the king will hold me harmless. You are wrong there, Sancho, said Don Quixote, for now that we have a suspicion who the owner is, and have him almost before us, we are bound to seek him and make restitution, and if we do not see him, the strong suspicion we have as to his being the owner makes us as guilty as if he were so. And so, friend Sancho, let not our search for him give you any uneasiness, for if we find him it will relieve mine. And so saying he gave Rocinante the spur, and Sancho followed him on foot, and loaded, and after having partly made the circuit of the mountain they found lying in a ravine, dead and half devoured by dogs and pecked by jackdaws, a mule saddled and bridled, all which still further strengthened their suspicion that he who had fled was the owner of the mule and the saddle pad. As they stood looking at it they heard a whistle like that of a shepherd watching his flock, and suddenly on their left there appeared a great number of goats, and behind them on the summit of the mountain the goatherd in charge of them, a man advanced in years. Don Quixote called aloud to him and begged him to come down to where they stood. He shouted in return, asking what had brought them to that spot, seldom or never trodden except by the feet of goats, or of the wolves and other wild beasts that roamed around. Sancho in return bade him come down, and they would explain all to him. The goatherd descended, and reaching the place where Don Quixote stood, he said, I will wager you are looking at that hack mule that lies dead in the hollow there, and, faith, it has been lying there now these 6 months. Tell me, have you come upon its master about here? We have come upon nobody, answered Don Quixote, nor on anything except a saddle pad and a little valise that we found not far from this. I found it too, said the goatherd, but I would not lift it nor go near it for fear of some ill luck or being charged with theft, for the devil is crafty, and things rise up under one's feet to make one fall without knowing why or therefore. That's exactly what I say, said Sancho. I found it too, and I would not go within a stone's throw of it. There I left it, and there it lies, just as it was, for I don't want a dog with a bell. Tell me, good man, said Don Quixote, do you know who is the owner of this property? All I can tell you, said the goatherd, is that about 6 months ago, more or less, there arrived at a shepherd's hut 3 leagues, perhaps, away from this, a youth of well-bred appearance and manners, mounted on that same mule which lies dead here, and with the same saddle-pad and valise which you say you found and did not touch. He asked us what part of the Sierra was the most rugged and retired. We told him that it was where we now are, and so in truth it is, for if you push on half a league farther, perhaps you will not be able to find your way out, and I am wondering how you have managed to come here, for there is no road or path that leads to this spot. I say, then, that on hearing our answer the youth turned about and made for the place we pointed out to him, leaving us all charmed with his good looks, and wondering at his question and the haste with which we saw him depart in the direction of the Sierra. And after that we saw him no more, until some days afterwards he crossed the path of one of our shepherds, and without saying a word to him, came up to him and gave him several cuffs and kicks, and then turned to the ass with our provisions and took all the bread and cheese it carried, and having done this made off back again into the Sierra with extraordinary swiftness. When some of us goatherds learned this, we went in search of him for about 2 days through the most remote portion of the Sierra, at the end of which we found him lodged in the hollow of a large thick cork tree. He came out to meet us with great gentleness, with his dress now torn and his face so disfigured and burned by the sun that we hardly recognized him, but that his clothes, though torn, convinced us, from the recollection we had of them, that he was the person we were looking for. He saluted us courteously, and in a few well-spoken words he told us not to wonder at seeing him going about in the skies, as it was binding upon him in order that he may work out a penance which for his many sins had been imposed upon him. We asked him to tell us who he was, but we were never able to find out from him. We begged of him too, when he was in want of food, which he could not do without, to tell us where we should find him, as we would bring it to him with all goodwill and readiness, or if this were not to his taste, at least to come and ask it of us and not take it by force from the shepherds. He thanked us for the offer, begged pardon for the late assault, and promised for the future to ask it in God's name without offering violence to anybody. As for fixed abode, he said he had no other than that which chance offered wherever night may overtake him, and his words ended in an outburst of weeping so bitter that we who listened to him must have been very stones had we not joined him in it, comparing what we saw of him the first time with what we saw now, for, as I said, he was a graceful and gracious youth, and in his courteous and polished language showed himself to be of good birth and courtly breeding, and rustics as we were that listened to him evening. To our rusticity his gentle bearing sufficed to make it plain, but in the mid of his conversation he stopped and became silent, keeping his eyes fixed upon the ground for some time, during which we stood still waiting anxiously to see what would come of this abstraction, and with no little pity, for from his behavior, now staring at the ground with fixed gaze and eyes wide open without moving an eyelid, again closing them, compressing his lips and raising his eyebrows, we could perceive plainly that a fit of madness of some kind had come upon him, and before long he showed that what we've imagined was the truth, for he arose in a fury from the ground where he had thrown himself, and attacked the first he found near him with such rage and fierceness that if we had not dragged him off him, he would have beaten or bitten him to death, all the while exclaiming, "O faithless Fernando, here shall ye pay the penalty of the wrong you have done me. These hands shall tear out that heart of yours, abode and dwelling of all iniquity, but of deceit and fraud above all." And to these he added other words, all in effect upbraiding this Fernando and charging him with treachery and faithlessness. We forced him to release his hold with no little difficulty, and without another word he left us, and rushing off plunged in among these brakes and brambles, so as to make it impossible for us to follow him. From this, we suppose that madness comes upon him from time to time, and that some one called Fernando must have done him a wrong of a grievous nature, such as the condition to which it had brought him seemed to show. All this has been since then confirmed on those occasions, and they have been many, on which he has crossed our path, at one time to beg the shepherds to give him some of the food they carry, at another to take it from them by force, for when there is a fit of madness upon him, evening though the shepherds offer it freely, he will not accept it but snatches it from them by dint of blows, but when he is in his senses he begs it for the love of God, courteously and civilly, and receives it with many thanks, and not a few tears. And to tell you the truth, sirs, continued the Gothard, it was yesterday that we resolved, I and 4 of the lads, 2 of them our servants, and the other 2 friends of mine, to go in search of him until we find him, and when we do to take him, whether by force or of his own consent, to the town of Almodovar, which is 8 leagues from this, and there strive to cure him if truly his malady admits of a cure, or learn when he is in his senses who he is, and if he has relatives to whom we may give notice of his misfortune. This, sirs, is all I can say in answer to what you have asked me, and be sure that the owner of the articles you found is he whom you saw pass by with such nimbleness and so naked. For Don Quixote had already described how he had seen the man go bounding along the mountain side, and he was now filled with amazement at what he heard from the Gothard, and more eager than ever to discover who the unhappy madman was, and in his heart he resolved, as he had done before, to search for him all over the mountain, not leaving a corner or cave unexamined until he had found him. But chance arranged matters better than he expected or hoped, for at that very moment, in a gorge on the mountain that opened where they stood, the youth he wished to find made his appearance, coming along talking to himself in a way that would have been unintelligible near at hand, much more at a distance. His garb was what has been described, save that as he drew near, Don Quixote perceived that a tattered doublet which he wore was amber tanned, from which he concluded that one who wore such garments could not be of very low rank. Approaching them, the youth greeted them in a harsh and hoarse voice, but with great courtesy. Don Quixote returned his salutation with equal politeness, and dismounting from Rocinante advanced with well-bred bearing and grace to embrace him, and held him for some time close in his arms as if he had known him for a long time. The other, whom we may call the ragged one of the sorry countenance, as Don Quixote was of the rueful, after submitting to the embrace pushed him back a little and, placing his hands on Don Quixote's shoulders, stood gazing at him as if seeking to see whether he knew him, not less amazed, perhaps, at the sight of the face, figure, and armor of Don Quixote than Don Quixote was at the sight of him. Chapter 24, in which is continued the adventure of the Sierra Morna. The history relates that it was with the greatest attention Don Quixote listened to the ragged knight of the Sierra, who began by saying, "Of a surety, Senor, whoever you are, for I know you not, I thank you for the proofs of kindness and courtesy you have shown me, and would I were in a condition to requite with something more than goodwill that which you have displayed towards me in the cordial reception you have given me, but my fate does not afford me any other means of returning kindnesses done me save the hearty desire to repay them. Mine," replied Don Quixote, "is to be of service to you, so much so that I had resolved not to quit these mountains until I had found you, and learned of you whether there is any kind of relief to be found for that sorrow under which from the strangeness of your life you seem to labor, and to search for you with all possible diligence, if search had been necessary, and if your misfortune should prove to be one of those that refuse admission to any sort of consolation, it was my purpose to join you in lamenting and mourning over it, so far as I could, for it is still some comfort in misfortune to find one who can feel for it. And if my good intentions deserve to be acknowledged with any kind of courtesy, I entreat you, Senor, by that which I perceive you possess in so high a degree, and likewise conjure you by whatever you love or have loved best in life, to tell me who you are and the cause that has brought you to live or die in these solitudes like a brute beast, dwelling among them in a manner so foreign to your condition as your garb and appearance show. And I swear," added Don Quixote, "by the order of knighthood which I have received, and by my vocation of knight-errant, if you gratify me in this, to serve you with all the zeal my calling demands of me, either in relieving your misfortune if it admits of relief, or in joining you in lamenting it as I promised to do." The knight of the thicket, hearing him of the rueful countenance talk in this strain, did nothing but stare at him again, and again survey him from head to foot, and when he had thoroughly examined him, he said to him, "If you have anything to give me to eat, for God's sake give it me, and after I have eaten I will do all you ask in acknowledgment of the goodwill you have displayed towards me." Sancho from his sack, and the goatherd from his pouch, furnished the ragged one with the means of appeasing his hunger, and what they gave him, he ate like a half-witted being, so hastily that he took no time between mouthfuls, gorging rather than swallowing, and while he ate neither he nor they who observed him uttered a word. As soon as he had done he made signs to them to follow him, which they did, and he led them to a green plot which lay a little farther off round the corner of a rock. On reaching it he stretched himself upon the grass, and the others did the same, all keeping silence, until the ragged one, settling himself in his place, said, If it is your wish, sirs, that I should disclose in a few words the surpassing extent of my misfortunes, you must promise not to break the thread of my sad story with any question or other interruption, for the instant you do so the tale I tell will come to an end. These words of the ragged one reminded Don Quixote of the tale his squire had told him when he failed to keep count of the goats that had crossed the river, and the story remained unfinished. But to return to the ragged one, he went on to say, I give you this warning because I wish to pass briefly over the story of my misfortunes, for recalling them to memory only serves to add fresh ones, and the less you question me the sooner shall I make an end of the recital, though I shall not omit to relate anything of importance in order fully to satisfy your curiosity. Don Quixote gave the promise for himself and the others, and with this assurance he began as follows. My name is Cardenio, my birthplace one of the best cities of this Andalusia, my family noble, my parents rich, my misfortune so great that my parents must have wept and my family grieved over it without being able by their wealth to lighten it, for the gifts of fortune can do little to relieve reverses sent by heaven. In that same country there was a heaven in which love had placed all the glory I could desire. Such was the beauty of Lucinda, a damsel as noble and as rich as I, but of happier fortunes, and of less firmness than was due to so worthy a passion as mine. This Lucinda I loved, worshipped, and adored from my earliest and tenderest years, and she loved me in all the innocence and sincerity of childhood. Our parents were aware of our feelings and were not sorry to perceive them, for they saw clearly that as they ripened, they must lead at last to a marriage between us, a thing that seemed almost prearranged by the equality of our families and wealth. We grew up, and with our growth grew the love between us, so that the father of Lucinda felt bound for propriety's sake to refuse me admission to his house, in this perhaps imitating the parents of that this so celebrated by the poets, and this refusal but added love to love and flame to flame. For though they enforced silence upon our tongues, they could not impose it upon our pens, which can make known the heart's secrets to a loved one more freely than tongues, for many a time the presence of the object of love shakes the firmest will and strikes dumb the boldest tongue. Ah, heavens, how many letters did I write her, and how many dainty modest replies did I receive, how many ditties and love songs did I compose in which my heart declared and made known its feelings, described its ardent longings, revelled in its recollections, and dallied with its desires. Length growing impatient, and feeling my heart languishing with longing to see her, I resolved to put into execution and carry out what seemed to me the best mode of winning my desired and merited reward, to ask her of her father for my lawful wife, which I did. To this his answer was that he thanked me for the disposition I showed to do honor to him and to regard myself as honored by the bestowal of his treasure, but that as my father was alive it was his by right to make this demand, for if it were not in accordance with his full will and pleasure, Lucinda was not to be taken or given by stealth. I thanked him for his kindness, reflecting that there was reason in what he said, and that my father would assent to it as soon as I should tell him, and with that view I went the very same instant to let him know what my desires were. When I entered the room where he was, I found him with an open letter in his hand, which, before I could utter a word, he gave me, saying, By this letter you will see, Cardenio, the disposition the Duke Ricardo has to serve you. This Duke Ricardo, as you, sirs, probably know already, is a grandee of Spain who has his seat in the best part of this Andalusia. I took and read the letter, which was couched in terms so flattering that evening I myself felt it would be wrong in my father not to comply with the request the Duke made in it, which was that he would send me immediately to him, as he wished me to become the companion, not servant, of his eldest son, and would take upon himself the charge of placing me in a position corresponding to the esteem in which he held me. On reading the letter, my voice failed me, and still more when I heard my father say, 2 days, therefore you will depart, Cardenio, in accordance with the Duke's wish, and give thanks to God who is opening a road to you by which you mayest attain what I know you do deserve. And to these words he added others of fatherly counsel. The time for my departure arrived. I spoke one night to Lucinda. I told her all that had occurred, as I did also to her father, entreating him to allow some delay and to defer the disposal of her hand until I should see what the Duke Ricardo sought of me. He gave me the promise, and she confirmed it with vows and swoonings unnumbered. Finally, I presented myself to the Duke, and was received and treated by him so kindly that very soon envy began to do its work. The old servants, growing envious of me, and regarding the Duke's inclination to show me favor as an injury to themselves. But the one to whom my arrival gave the greatest pleasure was the Duke's second son, Fernando by name, a gallant youth, of noble, generous, and amorous disposition, who very soon made so intimate a friend of me that it was remarked by everybody, for though the elder was attached to me and showed me kindness, he did not carry his affectionate treatment to the same length as Don Fernando. It so happened, then, that as between friends no secret remains unshared, and as the favor I enjoyed with Don Fernando had grown into friendship, he made all his thoughts known to me, and in particular a love affair, which troubled his mind a little. He was deeply in love with a peasant girl, a vassal of his father's, the daughter of wealthy parents, and herself so beautiful, modest, discreet, and virtuous, that no one who knew her was able to decide in which of these respects she was most highly gifted or most excelled. The attractions of the fair peasant raised the passion of Don Fernando to such a point that, in order to gain his object and overcome her virtuous resolutions, he determined to pledge his word to her to become her husband, for to attempt it in any other way was to attempt an impossibility. Bound to him as I was by friendship, I strove by the best arguments and the most forcible examples I could think of to restrain and dissuade him from such a course. But perceiving I produced no effect, I resolved to make the Duke Ricardo, his father, acquainted with the matter. But Don Fernando, being sharp-witted and shrewd, foresaw and apprehended this, perceiving that by my duty as a good servant I was bound not to keep concealed a thing so much opposed to the honor of my lord the Duke, and so, to mislead and deceive me, he told me he could find no better way of effacing from his mind the beauty that so enslaved him than by absenting himself for some months, and that he wished the absence to be effected by our going, both of us, to my father's house under the pretence which he would make to the Duke of going to see and buy some fine horses that there were in my city, which produces the best in the world. When I heard him say so, evening, if his resolution had not been so good a one, I should have hailed it as one of the happiest that could be imagined, prompted by my affection, seeing what a favorable chance and opportunity it offered me of returning to see my Lucinda. With this thought and wish I commended his idea and encouraged his design, advising him to put it into execution as quickly as possible, as in truth, absence produced its effect in spite of the most deeply rooted feelings. But, as afterwards appeared, when he said this to me, he had already enjoyed the peasant girl under the title of husband, and was waiting for an opportunity of making it known with safety to himself, being in dread of what his father the Duke would do when he came to know of his folly. It happened, then, that as with young men love is for the most part nothing more than appetite, which, as its final object is enjoyment, comes to an end on obtaining it, and that which seemed to be love takes to flight, as it cannot pass the limit fixed by nature, which fixes no limit to true love. What I mean is that, after Don Fernando had enjoyed this peasant girl, his passion subsided and his eagerness cooled, and if at first he feigned a wish to absent himself, in order to cure his love, he was now in reality anxious to go to avoid keeping his promise. The Duke gave him permission, and ordered me to accompany him. We arrived at my city, and my father gave him the reception due to his rank. I saw Lucinda without delay, and, though it had not been dead or deadened, my love gathered fresh life. To my sorrow I told the story of it to Don Fernando, for I thought that in virtue of the great friendship he bore me I was bound to conceal nothing from him. I extolled her beauty, her gaiety, her wit, so warmly that my praises excited in him a desire to see a damsel adorned by such attractions. To my misfortune I yielded to it, showing her to him one night by the light of a taper at a window where we used to talk to one another. As she appeared to him in her dressing gown, she drove all the beauties he had seen until then out of his recollection. Speech failed him, his head turned, he was spellbound, and in the end love-smitten, as you will see in the course of the story of my misfortune. And to inflame still further his passion, which he hid from me and revealed to heaven alone, it so happened that one day he found a note of hers entreating me to demand her of her father in marriage, so delicate, so modest, and so tender, that on reading it he told me that in Lucinda alone were combined all the charms of beauty and understanding that were distributed among all the other women in the world. It is true, and I own it now, that though I knew what good cause Don Fernando had to praise Lucinda, it gave me uneasiness to hear these praises from his mouth, and I began to fear, and with reason to feel, distrust of him, for there was no moment when he was not ready to talk of Lucinda, and he would start the subject himself evening though he dragged it in unseasonably, a circumstance that aroused in me a certain amount of jealousy, not that I feared any change in the constancy or faith of Lucinda, but still my fate led me to forebode what she assured me against. Don Fernando contrived always to read the letters I sent to Lucinda and her answers to me, under the pretense that he enjoyed the weight and sense of both. It so happened, then, that Lucinda having begged of me a book of chivalry to read, one that she was very fond of, Amadis of Gaul, Don Quixote no sooner heard a book of chivalry mentioned than he said, "Had your worship told me at the beginning of your story that the lady Lucinda was fond of books of chivalry, no other laudation would have been requisite to impress upon me the superiority of her understanding, for it could not have been of the excellence you describe had a taste for such delightful reading been wanting. So, as far as I am concerned, you need waste no more words in describing her beauty, worth, and intelligence, for, on merely hearing what her taste was, I declare her to be the most beautiful and the most intelligent woman in the world, and I wish your worship had, along with Amadis of Gaul, sent her the worthy Don Rugel of Greece, for I know the lady Lucinda would greatly relish Darada and Garia, and the shrewd sayings of the shepherd Darnel, and the admirable verses of his bucolics, sung and delivered by him with such sprightliness, wit, and ease. But a time may come when this omission can be remedied, and to rectify it nothing more is needed than for your worship to be so good as to come with me to my village, for there I can give you more than 300 books which are the delight of my soul, and the entertainment of my life, though it occurs to me that I have not got one of them now, thanks to the spite of wicked and envious enchanters. But pardon me for having broken the promise we made not to interrupt your discourse, for when I hear chivalry or knights errant mentioned, I can no more help talking about them than the rays of the sun can help giving heat, or those of the moon moisture. Pardon me, therefore, and proceed, for that is more to the purpose now." While Don Quixote was saying this, Cardenio allowed his head to fall upon his breast, and seemed plunged in deep thought, and though twice Don Quixote bade him go on with his story, he neither looked up nor uttered a word in reply, but after some time he raised his head and said, "I cannot get rid of the idea, nor will anyone in the world remove it, or make me think otherwise, and he would be a blockhead who would hold or believe anything else than that errant knave Master Elisabad made free with Queen Madasima. That is not true, by all that's good," said Don Quixote in high wrath. turning upon him angrily, as his way was, and it is a very great slander, or rather villainy. Queen Madissima was a very illustrious lady, and it is not to be supposed that so exalted a princess would have made free with a quack, and whoever maintains the contrary lies like a great scoundrel, and I will give him to know it, on foot or on horseback, armed or unarmed, by night or by day, or as he likes best. Cardenio was looking at him steadily, and his mad fit having now come upon him, he had no disposition to go on with his story, nor would Don Quixote have listened to it, so much had what he had heard about Madissima disgusted him. Strange to say, he stood up for her as if she were in earnest his veritable born lady. To such a pass had his unholy books brought him. Cardenio, then, being, as I said, now mad, when he heard himself given the lie, and called a scoundrel and other insulting names, not relishing the jest, snatched up a stone that he found near him, and with it delivered such a blow on Don Quixote's breast that he laid him on his back. Sancho Panza, seeing his master treated in this fashion, attacked the madman with his closed fist, but the ragged one received him in such a way that with a blow of his fist he stretched him at his feet, and then mounting upon him crushed his ribs to his own satisfaction. The Gothard, who came to the rescue, shared the same fate, and having beaten and pummeled them all, he left them and quietly withdrew to his hiding place on the mountain. Sancho rose, and with the rage he felt at finding himself so belabored without deserving it, ran to take vengeance on the Gothard, accusing him of not giving them warning that this man was at times taken with a mad fit, for if they had known it they would have been on their guard to protect themselves. The Gothard replied that he had said so, and that if he had not heard him, that was no fault of his. Sancho retorted, and the Gothard rejoined, and the altercation ended in their seizing each other by the beard and exchanging such fisticuffs that if Don Quixote had not made peace between them, they would have knocked one another to pieces. "Leave me alone, Sir Knight of the Rueful Countenance," said Sancho, grappling with the Gothard, "for of this fellow, who is a clown like myself, and no dubbed knight, I can safely take satisfaction for the affront he has offered me, fighting with him hand to hand like an honest man." "That is true," said Don Quixote, "but I know that he is not to blame for what has happened." With this he pacified them, and again asked the Gothard if it would be possible to find Cardenio, as he felt the greatest anxiety to know the end of his story. Chapter 25, which treats of the strange things that happened to the stout knight of La Mancha in the Sierra Morena, and of his imitation of the penance of Beltenebros. Don Quixote took leave of the Gothard, and once more mounting Rocinante, bade Sancho follow him, which he, having no ass, did very discontentedly. They proceeded slowly, making their way into the most rugged part of the mountain, Sancho all the while dying to have a talk with his master, and longing for him to begin, so that there should be no breach of the injunction laid upon him, but unable to keep silence so long, he said to him, "Senor Don Quixote, give me your worship's blessing and dismissal, for I'd like to go home at once to my wife and children, with whom I can at any rate talk and converse as much as I like, for to want me to go through these solitudes day and night and not speak to you when I have a mind is burying me alive. If luck would have it that animals spoke as they did in the days of Gisopete, it would not be so bad, because I could talk to Rocinante about whatever came into my head, and so put up with my ill fortune. But it is a hard case, and not to be borne with patience, to go seeking adventures all one's life and get nothing but cakes and blanketings, brickbats and punches, and with all this to have to sew up one's mouth without daring to say what is in one's heart, just as if one were dumb." "I understand you, Sancho," replied Don Quixote. "You are dying to have the interdict I placed upon your tongue removed. Consider it removed, and say what you will while we are wandering in these mountains." "So be it," said Sancho, let me speak now, for God knows what will happen by and by, and to take advantage of the permit at once, I ask, what made your worship stand up so for that Queen Majamasa, or whatever her name is, or what did it matter whether that abbot was a friend of hers or not? For if your worship had let that pass, and you were not a judge in the matter, it is my belief the madman would have gone on with his story, and the blow of the stone, and the cakes, and more than half a dozen cuffs would have been escaped. In faith, Sancho, answered Don Quixote, if you knewest as I do what an honorable and illustrious lady Queen Madisima was, I know you wouldst say I had great patience that I did not break in pieces the mouth that uttered such blasphemies, for a very great blasphemy it is to say or imagine that a queen has made free with a surgeon. The truth of the story is that Master Elisabod whom the madman mentioned was a man of great prudence and sound judgment, and served as governor and physician to the queen, but to suppose that she was his mistress is nonsense deserving very severe punishment, and as a proof that Cardenio did not know what he was saying, remember when he said it he was out of his wits. That is what I say, said Sancho. There was no occasion for minding the words of a madman, for if good luck had not helped your worship, and he had sent that stone at your head instead of at your breast, a fine way we should have been in for standing up for my lady over there, God confound her. And then, would not Cardenio have gone free as a madman? Against men in their senses or against madmen, said Don Quixote, every knight errant is bound to stand up for the honor of women, whoever they may be, much more for queens of such high degree and dignity as Queen Madisima, for whom I have a particular regard on account of her amiable qualities, for, besides being extremely beautiful, she was very wise and very patient under her misfortunes, of which she had many, and the counsel and society of the Master Elisabod were a great help and support to her in enduring her afflictions with wisdom and resignation. Therefore the ignorant and ill-disposed vulgar took occasion to say and think that she was his mistress, and they lie, I say it once more, and will lie 200 times more, all who think and say so. I neither say nor think so, said Sancho, let them look to it, with their bread let them eat it. They have rendered account to God whether they misbehaved or not. I come from my vineyard, I know nothing, I am not fond of prying into other men's lives. He who buys and lies feels it in his purse. Moreover, naked was I born, naked I find myself. I neither lose nor gain, but if they did, what is that to me? Many think there are flitches where there are no hooks, but who can put gates to the open plain? Moreover, they said of God, God bless me, said Don Quixote, what a set of absurdities you are stringing together. What has what we are talking about got to do with the proverbs you are threading one after the other? For God's sake hold your tongue, Sancho, and henceforward keep to prodding your ass and don't meddle in what does not concern you, and understand with all your 5 senses that everything I have done, am doing, or shall do, is well founded on reason and in conformity with the rules of chivalry, for I understand them better than all the world that profess them. Senor, replied Sancho, is it a good rule of chivalry that we should go astray through these mountains without path or road, looking for a madman, who when he is found will perhaps take a fancy to finish what he began, not his story, but your worship's head and my ribs, and end by breaking them altogether for us? Peace, I say again, Sancho, said Don Quixote, for let me tell you it is not so much the desire of finding that madman that leads me into these regions as that which I have of performing among them an achievement with which I shall win eternal name and fame throughout the known world, and it shall be such that I shall by that set the seal on all that can make a knight errant perfect and famous. And is it very perilous, this achievement? No, replied he of the rueful countenance, though it may be in the dice, that we may throw deuces instead of sixes, but all will depend on your diligence. On my diligence, said Sancho. Yes, said Don Quixote, For if you do return soon from the place where I mean to send you, my penance will be soon over, and my glory will soon begin. But as it is not right to keep you any longer in suspense, waiting to see what comes of my words, I would have you know, Sancho, that the famous Amadis of Gaul was one of the most perfect knights errant. I am wrong to say he was one. He stood alone, the first, the only one, the lord of all that were in the world in his time. A fig for Don Bilihanes, and for all who say he equaled him in any respect, for, my oath upon it, they are deceiving themselves. I say, too, that when a painter desires to become famous in his art he endeavors to copy the originals of the rarest painters that he knows, and the same rule holds good for all the most important crafts and callings that serve to adorn a state. Thus must he who would be esteemed prudent and patient imitate Ulysses, in whose person and labors Homer presents to us a lively picture of prudence and patience, as Virgil, too, shows us in the person of Aeneas the virtue of a pious son and the sagacity of a brave and skillful captain, not representing or describing them as they were, but as they ought to be, so as to leave the example of their virtues to posterity. In the same way Amadis was the pole star, day star, son of valiant and devoted knights, whom all we who fight under the banner of love and chivalry are bound to imitate. This, then, being so, I consider, friend Sancho, that the knight-errant who shall imitate him most closely will come nearest to reaching the perfection of chivalry. Now one of the instances in which this knight most conspicuously showed his prudence, worth, valor, endurance, fortitude, and love was when he withdrew, rejected by the Lady Oriana, to do penance upon the Pena Pauper, changing his name into that of Beltenebros, a name assuredly significant and appropriate to the life which he had voluntarily adopted. So, as it is easier for me to imitate him in this than in cleaving giants asunder, cutting off serpents' heads, slaying dragons, routing armies, destroying fleets, and breaking enchantments, and as this place is so well suited for a similar purpose, I must not allow the opportunity to escape which now so conveniently offers me its forelock. What is it in reality, said Sancho, that your worship means to do in such an out-of-the-way place as this? Have I not told you, answered Don Quixote, that I mean to imitate Amadis here, playing the victim of despair, the madman, the maniac, so as at the same time to imitate the valiant Don Roland, when at the fountain he had evidence of the fair Angelica having disgraced herself with Medoro, and through grief thereat went mad, and plucked up trees, troubled the waters of the clear springs, slew destroyed flocks, burned down huts, leveled houses, dragged mares after him, and perpetrated 100,000 other outrages worthy of everlasting renown and record. And, though I have no intention of imitating Roland, or Orlando, or Rodolando, for he went by all these names, step by step in all the mad things he did, said, and thought, I will make a rough copy to the best of my power, of all that seems to me most essential, but perhaps I shall content myself with the simple imitation of Amadis, who without giving way to any mischievous madness but merely to tears and sorrow, gained as much fame as the most famous. It seems to me, said Sancho, that the knights who behaved in this way had provocation and cause for those follies and penances. But what cause has your worship for going mad? What lady has rejected you, or what evidence have you found to prove that the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso has been trifling with Moor or Christian? There is the point, replied Don Quixote, and that is the beauty of this business of mine. No thanks to a knight-errant for going mad when he has cause. The thing is to turn crazy without any provocation, and let my lady know, if I do this in the dry, what I would do in the moist. Moreover, I have abundant cause in the long separation I have endured from my lady till death, Dulcinea del Toboso, for as you didst hear that shepherd Ambrosio say the other day, in absence all ills are felt and feared, and so, friend Sancho, waste no time in advising me against so rare, so happy, and so unheard of an imitation, mad I am, and mad I must be until you returnest with the answer to a letter that I mean to send by you to my lady Dulcinea. And if it be such as my constancy deserves, my insanity and penance will come to an end. And if it be to the opposite effect, I shall become mad in earnest, and, being so, I shall suffer no more. Thus, in whatever way she may answer, I shall escape from the struggle and affliction in which you will leave me, enjoying in my senses the boon you bearest me, or as a madman not feeling the evil you bringest me. But tell me, Sancho, have you got Mambrino's helmet safe? For I saw you take it up from the ground when that ungrateful wretch tried to break it in pieces but could not, by which the fineness of its temper may be seen. To which Sancho made answer, by the living God, Sir Knight of the Rueful Countenance, I cannot endure or bear with patience some of the things that your worship says, and from them I begin to suspect that all you tell me about chivalry, and winning kingdoms and empires, and giving islands, and bestowing other rewards and dignities after the custom of knights errant, must be all made up of wind and lies, and all pigments or figments, or whatever we may call them. For what would anyone think that heard your worship calling a barber's basin Mambrino's helmet without ever seeing the mistake all this time? But that one who says and maintains such things must have his brains addled. I have the basin in my sack all dinted, and I am taking it home to have it mended, to trim my beard in it, if, by God's grace, I am allowed to see my wife and children some day or other. Look here, Sancho, said Don Quixote, by him you didst swear by just. Now I swear you have the most limited understanding that any squire in the world has or ever had. Is it possible that all this time you have been going about with me you have never found out that all things belonging to knights errant seem to be illusions and nonsense and ravings, and to go always by contraries, and not because it really is so, but because there is always a swarm of enchanters in attendance upon us, that change and alter everything with us, and turn things as they please, and according as they are disposed to aid or destroy us. Thus what seems to you a barber's basin seems to me Mambrino's helmet, and to another it will seem something else, and rare foresight it was in the sage who is on my side to make what is really and truly Mambrine's helmet seem a basin to everybody, for, being held in such estimation as it is, all the world would pursue me to rob me of it. But when they see it is only a barber's basin they do not take the trouble to obtain it, as was plainly shown by him who tried to break it, and left it on the ground without taking it, for, by my faith, had he known it he would never have left it behind. Keep it safe, my friend, for just now I have no need of it. Truly, I shall have to take off all this armor and remain as naked as I was born, if I have a mind to follow Roland rather than Amadis in my penance. Thus talking they reached the foot of a high mountain, which stood like an isolated peak among the others that surrounded it. Past its base there flowed a gentle brook. All around it spread a meadow so green and luxuriant that it was a delight to the eyes to look upon it, and forest, trees in abundance, and shrubs and flowers added to the charms of the spot. Upon this place the Knight of the Rueful Countenance fixed his choice for the performance of his penance, and as he beheld it exclaimed, in a loud voice as though he were out of his senses, "This is the place, O ye heavens, that I select and choose for bewailing the misfortune in which ye yourselves have plunged me. This is the spot where the overflowings of mine eyes shall swell the waters of yon little brook, and my deep and endless sighs shall stir unceasingly the leaves of these mountain trees, in testimony and token of the pain my persecuted heart is suffering. O ye rural deities, whoever ye be that haunt this lone spot, give ear to the complaint of a wretched lover whom long absence and brooding jealousy have driven to bewail his fate among these wilds, and complain of the hard heart of that fair and ungrateful one, the end and limit of all human beauty. O ye wood nymphs and dryads that dwell in the thickets of the forest, so may the nimble, wanton satyrs by whom you are vainly wooed never disturb your sweet repose. Help me to lament my hard fate, or at least weary not at listening to it. O Dulcinea del Toboso, day of my night, glory of my pain, guide of my path, star of my fortune, so may heaven grant you in full all you seekest of it. Bethink you of the place and condition to which absence from you has brought me, and make that return in kindness that is due to my fidelity. O lonely trees, that from this day forward shall bear me company in my solitude, give me some sign by the gentle movement of your boughs that my presence is not distasteful to you. O, you, my squire, pleasant companion in my prosperous and adverse fortunes, fix well in your memory what you shall see me do here, so that you mayest relate and report it to the sole cause of all. And so saying, he dismounted from Rocinante, and in an instant relieved him of saddle and bridle, and, giving him a slap on the croup, said, he gives you freedom who is bereft of it himself. O steed, as excellent indeed as you are unfortunate in your lot, begone where you will, for ye bearest written on your forehead that neither Astolfo's hippogriff, nor the famed Frontino, that cost Bradamante so dear, could equal you in speed. Seeing this, Sancho said, good luck to him who has saved us the trouble of stripping the pack saddle off Dapple. By my faith he would not have gone without a slap on the croup and something said in his praise, though, if he were here I would not let anyone strip him, for there would be no occasion, as he had nothing of the lover or victim of despair about him, inasmuch as his master, which I was while it was God's pleasure, was nothing of the sort. And truly, Sir Knight of the Rueful Countenance, if my departure and your worship's madness are to come off in earnest, it will be as well to saddle Rocinante again in order that he may supply the want of Dapple, because it will save me time in going and returning. For if I go on foot I don't know when I shall get there or when I shall get back, as I am, in truth, a bad walker. I declare, Sancho, returned Don Quixote, it shall be as you will, for your plan does not seem to me a bad one, and 3 days therefore you will depart, for I wish you to observe in the meantime what I do and say for her sake, that you mayest be able to tell it. But what more have I to see besides what I have seen? Said Sancho. Much you knowest about it, said Don Quixote. I have now got to tear up my garments, to scatter about my armor, knock my head against these rocks, and more of the same sort of thing, which you must witness. For the love of God, said Sancho, be careful, your worship, how you give yourself those knocks on the head, for you may come across such a rock, and in such a way, that the very first may put an end to the whole contrivance of this penance. And I should think, if truly knocks on the head seem necessary to you, and this business cannot be done without them, you may be content, as the whole thing is feigned and counterfeit and in joke, you may be content, I say, with giving them to yourself in the water, or against something soft, like cotton, and leave it all to me. For I'll tell my lady that your worship knocked your head against a point of rock harder than a diamond. I thank you for your good intentions, friend Sancho, answered Don Quixote, but I would have you know that all these things I am doing are not in joke, but very much in earnest, for anything else would be a transgression of the ordinances of chivalry, which forbid us to tell any lie whatever under the penalties due to apostasy, and to do one thing instead of another is just the same as lying. So my knocks on the head must be real, solid, and valid, without anything sophisticated or fanciful about them, and it will be needful to leave me some lint to dress my wounds, since fortune has compelled us to do without the balsam we lost. It was worse losing the ass, replied Sancho, for with him lint and all were lost. But I beg of your worship not to remind me again of that accursed liquor, for my soul, not to say my stomach, turns at hearing the very name of it, and I beg of you, too, to reckon as past the 3 days you allowed me for seeing the mad things you do, for I take them as seen already and pronounced upon, and I will tell wonderful stories to my lady. So write the letter and send me off at once, for I long to return, and take your worship out of this purgatory where I am leaving you. Purgatory do you call it, Sancho? Said Don Quixote. Rather call it hell, or evening worse if there be anything worse. For one who is in hell, said Sancho, nulla est retentio, as I have heard say. I do not understand what retentio means, said Don Quixote. Retentio, answered Sancho, means that whoever is in hell never comes, nor can come out of it, which will be the opposite case with your worship, or my legs will be idle, that is if I have spurs to enliven Rocinante. Let me once get to El Toboso and into the presence of my lady Dulcinea, and I will tell her such things of the follies and madnesses, for it is all one that your worship has done and is still doing, that I will manage to make her softer than a glove, though I find her harder than a cork tree, and with her sweet and honeyed answer I will come back through the air like a witch, and take your worship out of this purgatory that seems to be hell but is not, as there is hope of getting out of it, which, as I have said, those in hell have not, and I believe your worship will not say anything to the contrary. That is true, said he of the rueful countenance, but how shall we manage to write the letter? And the Ascult order too, added Sancho. All shall be included, said Don Quixote, and as there is no paper, it would be well done to write it on the leaves of trees, as the ancients did, or on tablets of wax, though that would be as hard to find just now as paper. But it has just occurred to me how it may be conveniently and evening more than conveniently written, and that is in the notebook that belonged to Cardenio, and you will take care to have it copied on paper, in a good hand, at the first village you commenced to where there is a schoolmaster, or if not, any sacristan will copy it. But see you give it not to any notary to copy, for they write a law hand that Satan could not make out. But what is to be done about the signature? Said Sancho. The letters of Amadis were never signed, said Don Quixote. That is all very well, said Sancho, but the order must needs be signed, and if it is copied they will say the signature is false, and I shall be left without Ascolts. The order shall go signed in the same book, said Don Quixote, and on seeing it my niece will make no difficulty about obeying it. As to the love letter you can put by way of signature, yours till death, the Knight of the Rueful Countenance. And it will be no great matter if it is in some other person's hand, for as well as I recollect Dulcinea can neither read nor write, nor in the whole course of her life has she seen handwriting or letter of mine, for my love and hers have been always platonic, not going beyond a modest look an evening that so seldom that I can safely swear I have not seen her 4 times in all these 12 years. I have been loving her more than the light of these eyes that the earth will one day devour, and perhaps evening of those 4 times she has not once perceived that I was looking at her. Such is the retirement and seclusion in which her father Lorenzo Corchulo and her mother Aldonza Nogales have brought her up. So, said Sancho, Lorenzo Corchulo's daughter is the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso, otherwise called Aldonza Lorenzo. She it is, said Don Quixote, and she it is that is worthy to be lady of the whole universe. I know her well, said Sancho, and let me tell you she can fling a crowbar as well as the lustiest lad in all the town, giver of all good. But she is a brave lass, and a right and stout one, and fit to be helpmate to any knight errant that is or is to be, who may make her his lady. The horse and wench, what sting she has and what a voice! I can tell you one day she posted herself on the top of the belfry of the village to call some labourers of theirs that were in a ploughed field of her father's, and though they were better than half a league off they heard her as well as if they were at the foot of the tower, and the best of her is that she is not a bit prudish, for she has plenty of affability, and jokes with everybody, and has a grin and a jest for everything. So, Sir Knight of the Rueful Countenance, I say you not only may and ought to do mad freaks for her sake, but you have a good right to give way to despair, and hang yourself, and no one who knows of it but will say you did well, though the devil should take you. And I wish I were on my road already, simply to see her, for it is many a day since I saw her, and she must be altered by this time, for going about the fields always, and the sun and the air spoil women's looks greatly. But I must own the truth to your worship, Senor Don Quixote. Until now I have been under a great mistake, for I believed truly and honestly that the lady Dulcinea must be some princess your worship was in love with, or some person great enough to deserve the rich presents you have sent her, such as the Biscayan and the galley slaves, and many more no doubt, for your worship must have won many victories in the time when I was not yet your squire. But all things considered, what good can it do the Lady Aldonza Lorenzo, I mean the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso, to have the vanquished your worship sends or will send coming to her and going down on their knees before her, because may be when they came she'd be hackling flax or threshing on the threshing floor, and they'd be ashamed to see her, and she'd laugh or resent the present. I have before now told you many times, Sancho, said Don Quixote, that you are a mighty great chatter, and that with a blunt wit you are always striving at sharpness. But to show you what a fool you are and how rational I am, I would have you listen to a short story. You must know that a certain widow, fair, young, independent, and rich, and above all free and easy, fell in love with a sturdy, strapping young lay brother. His superior came to know of it, and one day said to the worthy widow by way of brotherly remonstrance, I am surprised, Senora, and not without good reason, that a woman of such high standing, so fair, and so rich as you are, should have fallen in love with such a mean, low, stupid fellow as so and so, when in this house there are so many masters, graduates, and divinity students from among whom you may choose as if they were a lot of pears, saying this one I'll take, that I won't take. But she replied to him with great sprightliness and candor, My dear sir, you are very much mistaken, and your ideas are very old-fashioned, if you think that I have made a bad choice in so and so, fool as he seems, because for all I want with him he knows as much and more philosophy than Aristotle. In the same way, Sancho, for all I want with Dulcinea del Toboso, she is just as good as the most exalted princess on earth. It is not to be supposed that all those poets who sang the praises of ladies under the fancy names they give them had any such mistresses. Thinkest you that the Amaryllises, the Phyllises, the Sylvias, the Dianas, the Galadias, the Philidas, and all the rest of them, that the books, the ballads, the barbers' shops, the theatres are full of, were really and truly ladies of flesh and blood, and mistresses of those that glorify and have glorified them? Nothing of the kind. They only invent them for the most part to furnish a subject for their verses, and that they may pass for lovers or for men valiant enough to be so, and so it suffices me to think and believe that the good Aldonza Lorenzo is fair and virtuous, and as to her pedigree it is very little matter, for no one will examine into it for the purpose of conferring any order upon her, and I, for my part, reckon her the most exalted princess in the world. For you shouldst know, Sancho, if you do not know, that two things alone beyond all others are incentives to love, and these are great beauty and a good name, and these two things are to be found in Dulcinea in the highest degree, for in beauty no one equals her, and in good name few approach her. And to put the whole thing in a nutshell, I persuade myself that all I say is as I say, neither more nor less, and I picture her in my imagination as I would have her to be, as well in beauty as in condition. Helen approaches her not, nor does Lucretia come up to her, nor any other of the famous women of times past, Greek, barbarian, or Latin. And let each say what he will, for if in this I am taken to task by the ignorant, I shall not be censured by the critical. I say that your worship is entirely right, said Sancho, and that I am an ass. But I know not how the name of ass came into my mouth, for a rope is not to be mentioned in the house of him who has been hanged. But now, for the letter, and then, God be with you, I am off. Don Quixote took out the notebook and, retiring to one side, very deliberately began to write the letter, and when he had finished it he called to Sancho, saying he wished to read it to him, so that he may commit it to memory, in case of losing it on the road, for with evil fortune like his anything may be apprehended. To which Sancho replied, write it 2 or 3 times there in the book and give it to me, and I will carry it very carefully, because to expect me to keep it in my memory is all nonsense, for I have such a bad one that I often forget my own name, but for all that repeat it to me, as I shall like to hear it, for surely it will run as if it was in print. Listen, said Don Quixote, this is what it says. Don Quixote's letter to Dulcinea del Toboso, sovereign and exalted lady, the pierced by the point of absence, the wounded to the heart's core, sends you, sweetest Dulcinea del Toboso, the health that he himself enjoys not. If your beauty despises me, if your worth is not for me, if your scorn is my affliction, though I be sufficiently long-suffering, hardly shall I endure this anxiety, which, besides being oppressive, is protracted. My good squire Sancho will relate to you in full, faring great, dear enemy, the condition to which I am reduced on your account. If it be your pleasure to give me relief, I am yours. If not, do as may be pleasing to you, for by ending my life I shall satisfy your cruelty and my desire. Yours till death, the Knight of the Rueful Countenance. By the life of my father, said Sancho, when he heard the letter, it is the loftiest thing I ever heard. Body of me, how your worship says everything as you like in it, and how well you fit in the Knight of the Rueful Countenance into the signature. I declare your worship is truly the very devil, and there is nothing you don't know. Everything is needed for the calling I follow, said Don Quixote. Now then, said Sancho, let your worship put the order for the 3 Ascolts on the other side and sign it very plainly, that they may recognize it at first sight. With all my heart, said Don Quixote, and as he had written it he read it to this effect. Mistress Niece, by this first of Ascolts please pay to Sancho Panza, my squire, 3 of the 5 I left at home in your charge, said 3 Ascolts to be paid and delivered for the same number received here in hand, which upon this and upon his receipt shall be duly paid. Done in the heart of the Sierra Morna, the 27th of August of this present year. That will do, said Sancho, now let your worship sign it. There is no need to sign it, said Don Quixote, but merely to put my flourish, which is the same as a signature, and enough for 3 asses, or evening 300. I can trust your worship, returned Sancho. Let me go and saddle Rocinante, and be ready to give me your blessing, for I mean to go at once without seeing the fooleries your worship is going to do. I'll say I saw you do so many that she will not want any more. At any rate, Sancho, said Don Quixote, I should like, and there is reason for it, I should like you, I say, to see me stripped to the skin, and performing a dozen or 2 of insanities, which I can get done in less than half an hour, for having seen them with yours own eyes, you can then safely swear to the rest that you wouldst add, and I promise you, you will not tell of as many as I mean to perform. For the love of God, master mine, said Sancho, let me not see your worship stripped, for it will sorely grieve me, and I shall not be able to keep from tears, and my head aches so with all I shed last night for Dapple, that I am not fit to begin any fresh weeping. But if it is your worship's pleasure that I should see some insanities, do them in your clothes, short ones, and such as come readiest to hand, for I myself want nothing of the sort, and, as I have said, it will be a saving of time for my return, which will be with the news your worship desires and deserves. If not, let the lady Dulcinea look to it. If she does not answer reasonably, I swear as solemnly as I can that I will fetch a fair answer out of her stomach with kicks and cuffs, for why should it be borne that A knight-errant as famous as your worship should go mad without rhyme or reason for a. Her ladyship had best not drive me to say it, for by God, I will speak out and let off everything cheap, evening if it doesn't sell. I am pretty good at that. She little knows me, faith. If she knew me she'd be in awe of me. In faith, Sancho, said Don Quixote, to all appearance you are no sounder in your wits than I. I am not so mad, answered Sancho, but I am more peppery. But apart from all this, what has your worship to eat until I come back? Will you sally out on the road like Cardenio to force it from the shepherds? Let not that anxiety trouble you, replied Don Quixote, for evening if I had it I should not eat anything but the herbs and the fruits which this meadow and these trees may yield me. The beauty of this business of mine lies in not eating, and in performing other mortifications. Do you know what I am afraid of? Said Sancho upon this, that I shall not be able to find my way back to the spot where I am leaving you. It is such an out-of-the-way place. Observe the landmarks well, said Don Quixote, for I will try not to go far from this neighborhood, and I will evening take care to mount the highest of these rocks to see if I can discover you returning. However, not to miss me and lose thyself, the best plan will be to cut some branches of the broom that is so abundant about here, and as you ghost, to lay them at intervals until you have come out upon the plain. These will serve you, after the fashion of the clue in the labyrinth of Theseus, as marks and signs for finding me on your return. So I will, said Sancho Panza, and having cut some, he asked his master's blessing, and not without many tears on both sides, took his leave of him, and mounting Rocinante, of whom Don Quixote charged him earnestly to have as much care as of his own person, he set out for the plain, strewing at intervals the branches of broom as his master had recommended him, and so he went his way, though Don Quixote still entreated him to see him do were it only a couple of mad acts. He had not gone 100 paces, however, when he returned and said, I must say, sinner, your worship said quite right, that in order to be able to swear without a weight on my conscience that I had seen you do mad things, it would be well for me to see if it were only one, though in your worship's remaining here I have seen a very great one. Did I not tell you so? Said Don Quixote. Chapter 26, in which are continued the refinements with which Don Quixote played the part of a lover in the Sierra Morna, returning to the proceedings of him of the rueful countenance when he found himself alone. The history says that when Don Quixote had completed the performance of the somersaults or capers, naked from the waist down, and clothed from the waist up, and saw that Sancho had gone off without waiting to see any more crazy feats, he climbed up to the top of a high rock, and there set himself to consider what he had several times before considered without ever coming to any conclusion on the point, namely, whether it would be better and more to his purpose to imitate the outrageous madness of Roland or the melancholy madness of Amadis, and communing with himself he said, what wonder is it if Roland was so good a knight and so valiant as everyone says he was, when, after all, he was enchanted, and nobody could kill him save by thrusting a corking pin into the sole of his foot, and he always wore shoes with 7 iron soles, though cunning devices did not avail him against Bernardo del Carpio, who knew all about them, and strangled him in his arms at Roncesvalles. But putting the question of his valor aside, let us come to his losing his wits, for certain it is that he did lose them in consequence of the proofs he discovered at the fountain, and the intelligence the shepherd gave him of Angelica having slept more than 2 siestas with Medoro, a little curly-headed Moor, and page to Agramonte. If he was persuaded that this was true, and that his lady had wronged him, it is no wonder that he should have gone mad. But how am I to imitate him in his madness, unless I can imitate him in the cause of it? For my Dulcinea, I will venture to swear, never saw a more in her life, as he is in his proper costume, and she is this day as the mother that bore her, and I should plainly be doing her a wrong if, fancying anything else, I were to go mad with the same kind of madness as Roland the Furious. On the other hand, I see that Amadis of Gaul, without losing his senses and without doing anything mad, acquired as a lover as much fame as the most famous, for, according to his history, on finding himself rejected by his lady Oriana, who had ordered him not to appear in her presence until it should be her pleasure, all he did was to retire to the Pena Pauper in company with a hermit, and there he took his fill of weeping until heaven sent him relief in the amid of his great grief and need. And if this be true, as it is, why should I now take the trouble to strip stark naked, or do mischief to these trees which have done me no harm? Or why am I to disturb the clear waters of these brooks which will give me to drink whenever I have a mind? Long live the memory of Amadis, and let him be imitated so far as is possible by Don Quixote of La Mancha, of whom it will be said, as was said of the other, that if he did not achieve great things, he died in attempting them, and if I am not repulsed or rejected by my Dulcinea, it is enough for me, as I have said, to be absent from her. And so, now to business, come to my memory ye deeds of Amadis, and show me how I am to begin to imitate you. I know already that what he chiefly did was to pray and commend himself to God. But what am I to do for a rosary, for I have not got one? And then it occurred to him how he may make one, and that was by tearing a great strip off the tail of his shirt which hung down, and making 11 knots on it, one bigger than the rest, and this served him for a rosary all the time he was there, during which he repeated countless Ave Marias. But what distressed him greatly was not having another hermit there to confess him and receive consolation from, and so he solaced himself with pacing up and down the little meadow, and writing, and carving on the bark of the trees and on the fine sand a multitude of verses all in harmony with his sadness, and some in praise of Dulcinea. But when he was found there afterwards, the only ones completely legible that could be discovered were those that follow here. Ye on the mountain side that grow, ye green things all, trees, shrubs, and bushes, are ye hoary of the woe that this poor aching bosom crushes? If it disturb you, and I owe some reparation, it may be a defense for me to let you know Don Quixote's tears are on the flow, and all for distant Dulcinea del Toboso. The lealest lover time can show, doomed for a lady love to languish, among these solitudes does go, a prey to every kind of anguish. Why love should like a spiteful foe thus use him, he has no idea, but hogsheads full, this does he know, Don Quixote's tears are on the flow, and all for distant Dulcinea del Toboso. Adventure seeking does he go, up rugged heights, down rocky valleys, but hill or dale, or high or low, mishap attends all his sallies. Love still pursues him to and fro, and plies his cruel scourge. Ah me, relentless fate, an endless woe. Don Quixote's tears are on the flow, and all for distant Dulcinea del Toboso. The addition of del Toboso to Dulcinea's name gave rise to no little laughter among those who found the above lines, for they suspected Don Quixote must have fancied that unless he added del Toboso when he introduced the name of Dulcinea the verse would be unintelligible, which was truly the fact, as he himself afterwards admitted. He wrote many more, but, as has been said, these 3 verses were all that could be plainly and perfectly deciphered. In this way, and in sighing and calling on the fawns and satyrs of the woods and the nymphs of the streams, and echo moist and mournful to answer, console, and hear him, as well as in looking for herbs to sustain him, he passed his time until Sancho's return. And had that been delayed 3 weeks, as it was 3 days, the knight of the rueful countenance would have worn such an altered countenance that the mother that bore him would not have known him, and here it will be well to leave him, wrapped up in sighs and verses, to relate how Sancho Panza fared on his mission. As for him, Coming out upon the high road, he made for El Toboso, and the next day reached the inn where the mishap of the blanket had befallen him. As soon as he recognized it, he felt as if he were once more living through the air, and he could not bring himself to enter it, though it was an hour when he may well have done so, for it was dinner time, and he longed to taste something hot, as it had been all cold fare with him for many days past. This craving drove him to draw near to the inn, still undecided whether to go in or not, and as he was hesitating there came out two persons who at once recognized him, and said one to the other, "Senor licentiate, is not he on the horse there Sancho Panza who, our adventure's housekeeper told us, went off with her master as esquire?" "So it is," said the licentiate, "and that is our friend Don Quixote's horse." And if they knew him so well, it was because they were the curate and the barber of his own village, the same who had carried out the scrutiny and sentence upon the books. And as soon as they recognized Sancho Panza and Rocinante, being anxious to hear of Don Quixote, they approached, and calling him by his name, the curate said, "Friend Sancho Panza, where is your master?" Sancho recognized them at once, and determined to keep secret the place and circumstances where and under which he had left his master, so he replied that his master was engaged in a certain quarter on a certain matter of great importance to him, which he could not disclose for the eyes in his head. "No, no," said the barber, "if you don't tell us where he is, Sancho Panza, we will suspect, as we suspect already, that you have murdered and robbed him, for here you are mounted on his horse. In fact, you must produce the master of the hack, or else take the consequences." "There is no need of threats with me," said Sancho, "for I am not a man to rob or murder anybody. Let his own fate, or God who made him, kill each one. My master is engaged very much to his taste doing penance in the amid of these mountains." And then, offhand and without stopping, he told them how he had left him, what adventures had befallen him, and how he was carrying a letter to the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso, the daughter of Lorenzo Corchuelo, with whom he was over head and ears in love. They were both amazed at what Sancho Panza told them, for, though they were aware of Don Quixote's madness and the nature of it, each time they heard of it, they were filled with fresh wonder. They then asked Sancho Panza to show them the letter he was carrying to the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso. He said it was written in a notebook, and that his master's directions were that he should have it copied on paper at the first village he came to. On this the curate said, if he showed it to him, he himself would make a fair copy of it. Sancho put his hand into his bosom in search of the notebook, but could not find it, nor, if he had been searching until now, could he have found it, for Don Quixote had kept it, and had never given it to him, nor had he himself thought of asking for it. When Sancho discovered he could not find the book, his face grew deadly pale, and in great haste he again felt his body all over, and seeing plainly it was not to be found, without more ado he seized his beard with both hands and plucked away half of it, and then, as quick as he could and without stopping, gave himself half a dozen cuffs on the face and nose till they were bathed in blood. Seeing this, the curate and the barber asked him what had happened him, that he gave himself such rough treatment. "What should happen me," replied Sancho, "but to have lost from one hand to the other, in a moment, 3 ass colts, each of them like a castle." "How is that?" said the barber. "I have lost the notebook," said Sancho, "that contained the letter to Dulcinea, and an order signed by my master in which he directed his niece to give me 3 ass colts out of 4 or 5 he had at home." And he then told them about the loss of Dapple. The curate consoled him, telling him that when his master was found he would get him to renew the order and make a fresh draft on paper, as was usual and customary, for those made in notebooks were never accepted or honored. Sancho comforted himself with this, and said if that were so, the loss of Dulcinea's letter did not trouble him much, for he had it almost by heart, and it could be taken down from him wherever and whenever they Liked. Repeat it then, Sancho, said the barber, and we will write it down. Afterwards, Sancho Panza stopped to scratch his head to bring back the letter to his memory, and balanced himself now on one foot, now the other, one moment staring at the ground, the next at the sky, and after having half gnawed off the end of a finger and kept them in suspense waiting for him to begin, he said, after a long pause, by God, Senor Licentiate, devil a thing can I recollect of the letter, but it said at the beginning, exalted and scrubbing lady. It cannot have said scrubbing, said the barber, but superhuman or sovereign. That is it, said Sancho. Then, as well as I remember, it went on, the wounded and wanting of sleep, and the pierced, kisses your worship's hands, ungrateful and very unrecognized fair one, and it said something or other about health and sickness that he was sending her, and from that it went tailing off until it ended with yours till death, the knight of the rueful countenance. It gave them no little amusement, both of them, to see what a good memory Sancho had, and they complimented him greatly upon it, and begged him to repeat the letter a couple of times more, so that they too may get it by heart to write it out by and by. Sancho repeated it 3 times, and, as he did, uttered 3,000 more absurdities. Then he told them more about his master, but he never said a word about the blanketing that had befallen himself in that inn, into which he refused to enter. He told them, moreover, how his lord, if he brought him a favorable answer from the lady Dulcinea del Toboso, was to put himself in the way of endeavoring to become an emperor, or at least a monarch, for it had been so settled between them, and with his personal worth and the may of his arm it was an easy matter to come to be one, and how on becoming one his lord was to make a marriage for him, for he would be a widower by that time, as a matter of course, and was to give him as a wife one of the damsels of the empress, the heiress of some rich and grand state on the mainland, having nothing to do with islands of any sort, for he did not care for them now. All this Sancho delivered with so much composure, wiping his nose from time to time, and with so little common sense, that his 2 hearers were again filled with wonder at the force of Don Quixote's madness that could run away with this poor man's reason. They did not care to take the trouble of disabusing him of his error, as they considered that since it did not in any way hurt his conscience it would be better to leave him in it, and they would have all the more amusement in listening to his simplicities, and so they bade him pray to God for his lord's health, as it was a very likely and a very feasible thing for him in course of time to come to be an emperor, as he said, or at least an archbishop or some other dignitary of equal rank. To which Sancho made answer, if fortune, sirs, should bring things about in such a way that my master should have a mind, instead of being an emperor, to be an archbishop, I should like to know what archbishops errant commonly give their squires. They commonly give them, said the curate, some simple benefice or cure, or some place as sacristan which brings them a good fixed income, not counting the altar fees, which may be reckoned at as much more. But for that, said Sancho, the squire must be unmarried, and must know, at any rate, how to help at mass, and if that be so, woe is me, for I am married already, and I don't know the first letter of the ABC. What will become of me if my master takes a fancy to be an archbishop, and not an emperor, as is usual and customary with knights errant? Be not uneasy, friend Sancho, said the barber, for we will entreat your master, and advise him, evening urging it upon him as a case of conscience, to become an emperor and not an archbishop, because it will be easier for him as he is more valiant than lettered. So I have thought, said Sancho, though I can tell you he is fit for anything. What I mean to do for my part is to pray to our Lord to place him where it may be best for him, and where he may be able to bestow most favors upon me. You speak like a man of sense, said the curate, and you will be acting like a good Christian. But what must now be done is to take steps to coax your master out of that useless penance you say he is performing, and we had best turn into this inn to consider what plan to adopt, and also to dine, for it is now time. Sancho said they may go in, but that he would wait there outside, and that he would tell them afterwards the reason why he was unwilling, and why it did not suit him to enter it. But he begged them to bring him out something to eat, and to let it be hot, and also to bring barley for Rocinante. They left him and went in, and soon the barber brought him out something to eat. By and by, after they had between them carefully thought over what they should do to carry out their object, the curate hit upon an idea very well adapted to humor Don Quixote and effect their purpose, and his notion, which he explained to the barber, was that he himself should assume the disguise of a wandering damsel, while the other should try as best he could to pass for a squire, and that they should thus proceed to where Don Quixote was, and he, pretending to be an aggrieved and distressed damsel, should ask a favor of him, which as a valiant knight-errant he could not refuse to grant, and the favor he meant to ask him was that he should accompany her, where she would conduct him, in order to redress a wrong which a wicked knight had done her, while at the same time she should entreat him not to require her to remove her mask, nor ask her any question touching her circumstances until he had righted her with the wicked knight.